Tonight, you're entering a place where stillness becomes medicine and wisdom becomes healing. For the next 3 hours, I'll guide you through peaceful Zen teachings, stories and reflections passed down through generations of Buddhist monks, carefully crafted to soothe the restless mind and gently mend the tired soul. These are more than teachings. They are quiet companions for the moments when life feels heavy, when your thoughts won't slow down, when your heart longs for rest. And no matter where you are in your journey, these ancient truths will meet you with kindness, never judgment. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to be anything. Just listen. Let the stories carry you like a soft current, away from worry and back toward wholeness. As you settle into the rhythm of the breath, you'll begin to feel the subtle shift, the calming of your inner world. The tension you've been holding will start to ease, and beneath it all, something deeper will begin to rise. Peace, warmth, quiet understanding. So take a moment now to get comfortable. Feel your body supported. Let your eyes grow heavy. Breathe in softly, and as you exhale, know that this is a time for healing, and you are exactly where you need to be. Let's begin with our first Zen teaching. In today's world, feeling calm and centered can be hard. But the quiet teachings of Zen remind us that peace is always close, within our own hearts. These Zen stories, each with a gentle message, help us slow down, breathe, and reconnect with the present moment. Each teaching brings comfort, eases stress, and guides us toward healing. Through simple wisdom and quiet reflection, we learn that true peace starts inside and can touch every part of our lives. 1. The Bamboo Whisper. In a quiet mountain village, there was a young monk named Tenzo who struggled with silence. Though he had taken vows of mindfulness and simplicity, his thoughts raced, his emotions stirred easily, and moments of stillness felt unbearable. The temple's head teacher, an old master known simply as Ko, noticed Tenzo's restlessness and invited him for a walk through the bamboo forest that stood behind the temple walls. The day was calm, and the sun filtered gently through the leaves. As they walked, the old master said nothing. Tenzo felt nervous, expecting a teaching or question, but none came. All he could hear was the soft rustling of the bamboo as the wind passed through it, gentle and rhythmic, like a whisper meant only for the soul. After some time, Ko stopped beneath a tall, slender stalk of bamboo and pointed upward. "This bamboo never rushes to grow," the master said softly. "It bends with the wind, sways with the seasons, and waits. No matter how fierce the storm, it does not break. It does not resist. It listens." Tenzo stood silently, unsure of what to say. The old master placed a hand over his heart and continued, "You too can bend. You too can listen. But first, you must stop fighting the wind inside you." Tenzo lowered his eyes. He realized that every time he sat in meditation, he had been struggling to quiet his thoughts as if they were enemies. He had tried to silence his feelings with force, not gentleness. In that moment, he understood. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the space in which everything becomes clear. The whispering bamboo was not just sound, it was a teacher. For the next several days, Tenzo returned to the bamboo grove. He no longer tried to silence the noise in his mind. Instead, he listened to the wind, to his breath, to the small stirrings of his own spirit. Slowly, his inner storm began to calm, and in the quiet rustle of the bamboo, he heard something he had never truly heard before: peace. Moral of the story: peace does not come by force. Like the bamboo that whispers in the wind, true stillness arises when we listen with openness. Instead of resisting your emotions or thoughts, allow them to move gently through you. The more you listen without judgment, the more you begin to hear the quiet voice of your own wisdom. 2. Silence between raindrops. There was once a woman named May who lived near the foot of a misty mountain. Her heart was heavy with sorrow. She had lost someone she loved deeply, and in the weeks that followed, even the beauty of the forest around her felt hollow. She often sat alone by her small window, listening to the soft rain that visited every morning, but it brought her no comfort, only more reminders of what was no longer there. One afternoon, a wandering Zen monk named Riku came to her village. He was known for speaking little and listening well. Curious, May offered him tea and quietly shared her pain. Riku did not offer answers. Instead, he asked her to walk with him the next day, at dawn, when the rain would fall again. As the sky lightened and the rain began, they walked through the narrow forest path in silence. The rain fell gently, tapping leaves, dripping from branches, and landing on the earth with soft rhythms. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Riku paused and said, "Do you hear it?" May listened. "The rain?" "No," he whispered, "the silence between the raindrops." She furrowed her brow. At first, she thought it was a riddle. But then she closed her eyes and let herself truly listen, not just to the rain, but to what lived between each drop. The soft space, the pause, the quiet that wasn't emptiness, but presence. In that stillness, she suddenly felt her heart shift. There was something in that silence, something alive, tender, spacious. The monk said, "Grief is not something to run from. It reigns in the heart like this, but there is always a silence between sorrows. That silence is where healing waits." Tears came to her eyes, but they were not heavy like before. They came without fear. The rain continued, but now it felt like a lullaby. She began to notice the rhythm, the breath of the forest, the stillness that held everything without pushing or pulling. That morning, May did not stop grieving. But for the first time, she didn't feel lost in it. She had heard the silence between the raindrops, and something in her had begun to soften. Moral of the story: healing does not always come from doing. It often begins in the spaces between pain, just as silence lives between raindrops. When we stop running from sorrow and begin listening to the quiet within, we discover that peace and sadness can coexist. In that stillness, the soul finds its way back home. 3. The empty teacup. In a quiet Zen monastery nestled between mountain ridges, there lived a young scholar named Haru. He had studied the sacred texts, memorized sutras, and could debate for hours on philosophy and doctrine. Believing he had mastered the path of wisdom, Haru requested an audience with Master Kaio, an old monk known for his deep insight and simple way of living. When Haru arrived at the master's hut, he bowed and immediately began to speak. He listed everything he had learned, quoting ancient verses, comparing teachings, and explaining his own interpretations. Kaio listened quietly, nodding now and then, his eyes calm and unreadable. After several minutes, the master gestured for Haru to sit. He brought out a teapot and 2 small porcelain cups. As Haru continued speaking, the master began to pour tea into the scholar's cup. The warm liquid filled the cup quickly, but Kaio didn't stop. The tea rose to the rim and then spilled over, trickling across the wooden table and onto the floor. Haru jumped up, startled. "Master, the cup is full," he exclaimed. "It cannot take any more." Kaio looked at him and gently said, "Like this cup, your mind is already full, with your own knowledge, your own voice, your own certainty. How can I show you Zen if you cannot make space for it?" Haru stood in silence, the truth of the moment washing over him like a wave. He realized that his endless search for knowledge had become a wall, not a doorway. He had come to be taught, yet had arrived already convinced he knew everything worth knowing. His heart was not open, it was crowded. He bowed deeply, this time not out of formality, but out of humility. That day, he didn't ask more questions. He simply sat with the master in silence and sipped his tea slowly. For the first time, he tasted the emptiness not as a lack, but as a gift. Moral of the story: to receive wisdom, we must first make space for it. Like a teacup that cannot be filled when overflowing, a mind full of ego and certainty cannot learn. Emptiness is not weakness, it is readiness. When we let go of what we think we know, true understanding can finally begin to pour in. 4. Shadows on the koi pond. In a tranquil garden beyond the noise of the city, there was a koi pond that reflected the sky like glass. A monk named Sora often sat beside it, watching the fish glide gently through the water. The pond was his favorite place to meditate. But one evening, as clouds passed above and the wind stirred the surface, the water darkened, and the reflection became scattered and unclear. That same day, a boy named Ren had arrived at the temple with his parents. Ren was quiet and withdrawn. His eyes looked tired for someone so young, his mind weighed down by worries he didn't know how to express: trouble at school, tension at home, fear of not being enough. Seeing the boy's sadness, the abbot invited Ren to sit with Sora at the koi pond. They sat without speaking. Ren looked down into the water and frowned. The pond, once peaceful, now rippled and restless. "Why does the water look so different today?" he asked softly. Sora smiled. "Because the wind is restless and the clouds cast shadows." "Can the fish still see?" Ren asked. "Not clearly," Sora replied, "but they do not panic. They continue swimming, trusting that the surface will clear again. They don't chase the shadow. They swim through it." Ren stared into the pond. His reflection wavered, broken into fragments. He whispered, "Sometimes I feel like that, like something's wrong inside me." Sora placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "Nothing is wrong with you. You are just looking at your mind when the wind is blowing. Thoughts, fears, worries. They are like shadows on water. They come and go, but underneath, the pond is always whole. And so are you. For the first time in many days, Ren felt a small warmth rise in his chest. He didn't feel fixed, but he didn't feel broken either. He watched the koi swim gently beneath the shadows, unbothered, graceful. As the wind softened, the water began to clear. The pond, once again, held the sky. And in that stillness, Ren glimpsed a quiet truth. His fears were not who he was. They were just passing shadows. Moral of the story: our thoughts and emotions are not permanent. They are like shadows on water. When we stop fighting them and simply allow them to pass, we begin to see the calm that lives beneath. True peace comes not from changing the surface, but from remembering the stillness always waiting underneath. 5. A stone in the river. Long ago, nestled deep in the mountains, a river flowed with quiet grace. Beside it lived a solitary monk named Tenzin, known for his deep silence and calm nature. Travelers would often stop by his small hut to seek advice or warmth, and he would offer them tea, a fire, and a listening ear. One day, a troubled man named Arata came to the river's edge. His face was tense, his words rushed, and his hands never stopped moving. "I've tried everything," he said. "Meditation, fasting, chanting, but my mind is like a storm. I can't stop thinking. I can't find peace." Tenzin said nothing. Instead, he pointed to the river and invited Arata to walk with him. They followed the current upstream until they reached a bend where the water rushed quickly over the rocks. There, in the middle of the river, was a large stone. The water slammed against it, but could not move it. Tenzin turned to Arata and asked, "Do you see how the stone stays still, even while the river moves wildly around it?" "Yes," Arata replied. "It's heavy, solid." The monk nodded. "Your thoughts are like this river, always flowing, always changing. You've been trying to stop them, but the goal is not to stop the river. It is to become the stone." Arata frowned. "But how do I become the stone?" Tenzin crouched down and picked up a smaller rock from the riverbed. He held it in his palm and let the water rush over it. Stillness doesn't come from resisting the current. It comes from being rooted, from resting deep within yourself, so the thoughts can pass without carrying you away. That night, Arata stayed by the river. He didn't try to stop his thoughts. He simply watched them, like water rushing past a stone, and for the first time, he didn't feel afraid of his mind. He began to feel that maybe, just maybe, he could learn to rest in that stillness too. Moral of the story: peace doesn't come from stopping your thoughts. It comes from not being moved by them. Like a stone in a river, you can remain steady even when your mind rushes with emotion and noise. In that quiet strength, you find the freedom to simply be. 6. Where the crane sleeps. Long ago, in a village nestled between rice fields and winding streams, there lived a quiet farmer named Aki. Each morning before sunrise, he would walk to the edge of a marsh where a white crane had made its resting place. The bird stood in stillness, unmoving even when wind or rain passed through. Villagers often spoke of it as a spirit, gentle, wise, and unbothered by the world. Aki admired the crane, He often watched it before beginning his day, hoping to understand the calm it carried. His own life, though simple, was filled with tension. Crops sometimes failed, neighbors argued, and his mind never seemed to stop turning. He wanted peace like the cranes, but no matter how quiet the world became, his thoughts kept moving. One morning, after a long night of troubled sleep, Aki found the crane resting again, motionless in the soft mist. He sat on a nearby rock and whispered, "How do you sleep so still when everything around you changes?" To his surprise, an old monk happened to be walking by. Hearing Aki's question, he smiled and sat beside him. "The crane does not resist the wind," the monk said. "It does not argue with the cold. It sleeps because it trusts." Aki frowned. "Trusts what?" "That the world will change, and that it need not fight the changing." The monk pointed to the crane. "It does not sleep because the world is perfect. It sleeps because it is at peace with what is." Aki's breath caught in his chest. He looked again at the crane, not as something magical, but as something deeply wise. The bird's stillness was not a sign of escape. It was surrender, not giving up, but letting go. It was trust in the moment, in the breath, in the cycle of life itself. For the first time, Aki closed his eyes there beside the marsh. The wind stirred the reeds, the water shifted, and the morning sun warmed his face. And within that motion, he felt a stillness he had never known, not from control, but from release. Moral of the story: peace does not come when the world stops moving. It comes when we stop resisting the flow of life. Like the crane that sleeps amidst wind and water, we find rest not by controlling the world, but by trusting it. True calm arises when we stop grasping and begin to simply be. 7. Wind through the paper door. In a small wooden temple atop a quiet hill lived an elderly monk named Yori. The temple was simple, its walls made of wood and rice paper, its doors light enough to move with the wind. Pilgrims would come from far away, not for great sermons, but for the peace that seemed to live in the air around Yori. One late afternoon, a young woman named Aiko arrived at the temple, carrying deep pain in her chest. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I try to stay calm. I try to be strong. But my heart, it breaks too easily. The smallest thing, a word, a look, hurts me. I feel like I'm made of paper." Yori led her to a small meditation room where the sliding paper doors were open just enough for the breeze to pass through. As they sat, the wind moved softly across the floor, brushing past the paper with a delicate whisper. Aiko flinched every time the door creaked. "I want to be solid," she said. "Hard like stone, so nothing can hurt me." Yori smiled gently. "Stones do not bend, so when they break, they shatter. But paper flows with the wind. It lets it pass. That is why it lasts." She looked at the door, confused. "You mean it's good to be this sensitive?" "I mean," he said softly, "it's good to feel as long as you don't cling. The door does not hold the wind. It lets it pass through. When you feel pain, let it pass through you like wind through the paper door. Do not hold it. Do not become it. Simply notice it and let it go." Aiko sat quietly. The wind passed again. She noticed how the paper swayed but did not tear. She felt her breath, shaky but present. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't fight them this time. She let them come, like wind, like feeling, like life moving through her. And in that moment, something shifted. Not the pain, but the fear of feeling it. She understood that softness was not weakness. It was the strength to move with the world, not against it. Moral of the story: being sensitive is not a flaw. Like the paper door that bends but doesn't break, your softness can be your strength. When we allow our emotions to pass through us instead of resisting or clinging, we remain open, and in that openness, we discover peace. 8. Breathing with the mountain. There was once a girl named Hannah who lived in a noisy city where cars never stopped. People rushed everywhere, and even the sky felt heavy. She often felt overwhelmed, her chest tight, her thoughts tangled, her heart tired. Though she smiled each day, inside she felt lost, as if something deep within her had forgotten how to breathe. One summer, her parents sent her to visit her grandfather, a quiet man who lived alone in a wooden cabin high in the mountains. Hannah didn't expect much. No phone signal, no screens, only trees and silence. She felt anxious even before she arrived, unsure what to do with all the stillness. On her first morning, her grandfather led her to a wide, open ridge just before sunrise. The sky was pale with light, and the mountains stretched beneath them like something ancient and alive. He said nothing. He simply sat on a large, flat stone and closed his eyes. Unsure what else to do, Hannah sat beside him. Minutes passed, then more. She could hear her own heartbeat. The wind brushed her skin. The birds began their quiet morning songs. Still, her grandfather said nothing. She finally whispered, "What are we doing?" He opened one eye and smiled. "We are breathing with the mountain." She looked around. "But it's just sitting there." "So are we," he said gently. "And like us, the mountain breathes. Slowly, steadily. Can you feel it?" She closed her eyes and listened. The wind moved like an exhale across the trees. The warmth of the rising sun touched her skin like breath. The silence was not empty. It was full of life, of space, of something vast and kind. Without realizing it, Hannah took her first deep breath in days. Then another, and another. Her chest loosened. Her thoughts softened. She didn't need to think her way out of anything. She just needed to breathe with the world, not against it. They stayed there until the sun had fully risen. No words were needed. The mountain had already spoken. Moral of the story: when life feels too heavy, return to your breath. Like the mountain, you do not need to force anything. You only need to be. In stillness, in silence, and in steady breath, you reconnect to the part of you that has never been lost. Peace begins the moment you choose to slow down and simply breathe. 9. A monk and the falling leaf. High in the mountains, where the air was crisp and the mornings came wrapped in mist, there lived a monk named Shiro, who had spent many years in quiet meditation. He was known for his deep stillness. People said even the wind grew calm when it passed near him. Yet, beneath his calm appearance, Shiro carried a quiet sorrow. He had lost his brother many years ago in a time of war, and though he had never spoken of it, the pain still lived inside him like a shadow. One autumn morning, as golden leaves began to fall from the trees, a young novice named Nico joined Shiro in the courtyard for morning chores. They swept the leaves in silence. Then, without warning, a single leaf drifted slowly from above and landed in the palm of Shiro's hand. He stared at it for a long time. Nico watched, but said nothing. After several moments, Shiro spoke, not to Nico, but to the wind. "When I was a boy," he said softly, "my brother would catch falling leaves and say they were letters from the earth. He believed they were tiny messages from the world, reminding us that everything is always changing." Nico nodded, unsure of what to say. Shiro held the leaf gently between his fingers. "I used to think that letting go meant forgetting, but leaves do not fall because they are lost. They fall because the tree knows it is time to let go. Not out of sadness, but because life must keep moving." A breeze swept through the courtyard, and more leaves began to fall, dancing gently to the ground. Shiro closed his eyes, and for the first time in many years let the memory of his brother move through him. Not like a wound, but like a whisper. He felt the grief, but it no longer pulled him under. Instead, it opened something, a kind of lightness. Nico, watching, gently asked, "Will it ever stop hurting?" Shiro looked at him with eyes soft like the autumn sky. "No," he said, "but one day it will stop holding you still." Moral of the story: grief doesn't disappear, but like a leaf falling from a tree, it teaches us when to let go. Pain does not mean something is broken. It means something mattered. When we stop resisting it, grief becomes less of a weight and more of a wind, reminding us that life moves, and so can we. 10. Clouds over still water. In a small village surrounded by rolling hills, there was a calm lake known for its mirror-like surface. The elders said it could reflect the truth of anything that stood before it, clear, undistorted, and pure. Travelers came from far away just to look into its waters, hoping to glimpse something about themselves they had forgotten. A young man named Kaito lived nearby. He was kind, but often troubled by thoughts he couldn't control. Doubts, regrets, worries about what others thought of him. All of it swirled in his mind like a storm. No matter how hard he tried to focus or stay calm, something inside always pulled him away. He felt like he was drowning in his own thoughts. One afternoon he went to the lake, hoping for answers. As he sat at the water's edge, dark clouds began to gather above. The clear reflection vanished. The surface rippled, and the sky turned grey. Kaito grew frustrated. "Even the lake can't stay still," he muttered. "How can I ever find peace if everything keeps changing?" An old monk who lived in a nearby hut had been watching quietly from a distance. He approached slowly and sat beside Kaito. "The water has not lost its stillness," he said softly. "It only looks that way because of the clouds." Kaito didn't understand. The monk reached down and touched the surface gently with his fingers. "Peace is not the absence of clouds," he continued. "It's the understanding that clouds come and go. But the lake, like your true self, remains beneath them, untouched." The words sank deep into Kaito's heart. He realized he had been measuring his peace by the surface of things, his mood, his thoughts, the opinions of others. He had forgotten that who he truly was lived beneath all of it. As they sat together, the clouds slowly moved on. The lake became clear again, reflecting the sky once more. But now Kaito understood. Even when the clouds return, the stillness is never gone. It only waits beneath the passing noise, always present, always ready to be seen again. Moral of the story: peace isn't about having perfect conditions. It's about recognizing that your true nature lies beneath the temporary storms. Like still water under drifting clouds, your calm is always there, unchanged, waiting for you to notice it again. 11. One candle, one moment. In a quiet hall, lit only by lantern light, a Zen temple prepared for its evening meditation. The room was still, the air cool, and in the center of the floor sat a single candle, its flame soft, steady, and warm. The monks filed in, robes rustling like gentle waves. Among them was a boy named Riku, newly arrived and still learning the ways of silence and attention. Riku was restless. His thoughts pulled him in many directions. Worries about his family, questions about whether he belonged here, and shame over how often his mind wandered during meditation. That night, he sat with his eyes open, staring at the candle. He hoped the flame might quiet his thoughts, but instead he only felt more aware of his distractions. After the meditation, the teacher, Master Haku, motioned for Riku to stay behind. He walked over and sat beside him in the dim light of the flickering flame. "You looked at the candle," the master said. "But did you see it?" Riku hesitated. "I don't know. I was trying." The master nodded and leaned forward. "This flame. Do you see how it does not burn the past? It does not light the future. It exists only now. Its glow doesn't stretch backward to yesterday's sorrow, nor forward to tomorrow's fear. It only gives warmth to this very moment." Riku stared again at the flame. He noticed its gentle flicker, how it leaned with the breath of the room, how it held the space with quiet certainty. His breathing began to slow. For a few seconds, he wasn't thinking. He was simply being, like the candle. Master Haku spoke again, his voice no louder than a whisper. "Your mind will wander. That is its nature. But peace lives not in perfect stillness. It lives in returning. Each time you come back to this moment, you are lighting the candle again, again and again." Riku didn't respond. He didn't need to. In that moment, watching the soft flame, he felt something he hadn't felt before. Presence. Not in the mind, but in the heart. A single candle, a single breath, a single moment. Finally seen. Moral of the story: peace is not found in controlling every thought. It's found in returning to the present. Like a candle that burns only in this moment, you too can shine gently, simply by being here. In each breath, each quiet pause, you begin again, and that is enough. 12. The Bell at Dusk. In a remote valley between forested hills, there stood an old temple known for a single bronze bell that rang each evening at dusk. The bell's sound was deep and low, soft yet powerful. It echoed across the valley like a heartbeat, reminding all who heard it that the day was ending and stillness had come. At this temple lived a boy named Kien, who had been sent by his family after the sudden death of his father. Though he performed his duties, cleaning the altar, preparing rice, sweeping fallen leaves. His heart was heavy, and his nights were filled with silent tears. He could not understand how the world could remain so calm when his own had fallen apart. Every evening, just before sunset, the bell was rung by an elder monk named Rin. One evening, noticing Kien lingering in the courtyard, Rin invited him to join. Kien hesitated. "I don't feel peaceful," he whispered. "I don't think I should ring something meant for peace." Rin looked at him gently. "This bell is not only for peace, it is also for pain. It does not ring because all is well. It rings to remind us that everything changes, and that even sorrow is part of that change." Together, they stepped into the bell tower. Rin showed Kien the wooden beam used to strike the bell. "Don't strike it with force," he said. "Let your breath guide your hands. Let the sound come from your heart, not your strength." Kien took a slow breath and pulled the beam forward. When it struck, the bell released a sound so deep it seemed to vibrate inside his chest. The tone stretched far into the valley, then faded softly into silence. He stood still, eyes wide, unsure what he had just felt. It was not relief, not joy, but something else, something honest. Like the bell, his grief had been given a voice, and in that voice, it had become softer. Rin placed a hand on Kien's shoulder. "When you ring the bell, you don't chase silence. You invite it, just as you do with your pain. Welcome it, let it speak, and then let it go." Moral of the story: healing begins not when we silence our pain, but when we allow it to be heard without fear. Like the bell that rings into dusk, sorrow can be expressed with grace, and in that expression we find space for peace to gently return. 13. Footsteps on rice paper. In a temple surrounded by cherry blossoms and silent stone lanterns, there was a long corridor lined with white rice paper. It was so delicate that even the softest footstep left a trace. Monks were taught to walk this hallway each morning in silence, placing each step with care and awareness. One day, a new monk named Kaito arrived. Eager to impress and prove his dedication, he walked quickly, wanting to be the first to complete the morning path. But in his haste, his steps were loud and clumsy, leaving deep marks and tearing one of the fragile sheets. He froze, embarrassed. Other monks glanced at him with quiet eyes, but said nothing. The next morning, the temple's abbot, Master Renji, asked Kaito to walk the corridor again, but this time alone. Kaito bowed, feeling the weight of his mistake. He placed his foot on the rice paper carefully, slowly, as if each step were a word in a sacred prayer. Halfway through the hall, he felt overwhelmed. His chest tightened and tears pricked his eyes. Not from shame, but from the sudden awareness of how every step he took left a mark. Not just here, but everywhere in life. When he reached the end, Master Renji was waiting. He didn't scold him. He simply said, "Our actions are like footsteps on rice paper. Even the smallest ones leave a trace. That is why we walk with awareness, not to be perfect, but to be present." Kaito bowed deeply, this time with humility, not pride. He saw how much of his life had been lived in hurry, in proving, chasing, achieving. But presence was something else. It was not about being first. It was about being here, with each step, with each breath. From that day forward, Kaito walked slower. He spoke with more softness. He listened more, not because someone told him to, but because he began to understand that every moment mattered, every word, every step, every choice. And like footsteps on rice paper, he chose to leave only what was gentle behind. Moral of the story: everything we do leaves a mark on others, on ourselves, on the world. When we live with awareness, even the quietest actions carry meaning. Presence is not about perfection, it's about care. And when we walk gently through life, we create peace wherever we go. 14. Ink on sand. In the southern desert, where the wind whispered across endless dunes, there stood a small temple made of clay and stone. It was humble, often forgotten by travelers, but within its walls lived an old calligrapher monk named Ita, whose scrolls were said to carry the silence of the desert in every stroke. One summer, a young man named Daiki arrived, exhausted and full of questions. He had tried many paths, books, temples, teachers, but still felt lost. "I write down every teaching," he said, "every lesson. I copy every word the masters say, but I don't feel peace. I don't feel anything lasting." Ata listened, then led Daiki outside, beyond the temple's shadow, into the open sands. He carried with him a calligraphy brush, a bowl of black ink, and no paper. Kneeling, Ata dipped the brush and began to write a single character into the warm, dry sand. The strokes were perfect, graceful, strong. Daiki watched with awe, but as the wind picked up, the word blurred, then disappeared completely. Daiki looked confused. "Why did you do that? It's already gone." The old monk smiled gently. "And so it should be. But your work, your art, it vanished." Ata dipped the brush again. "So does every breath, every thought, every moment. Nothing you hold in your mind or heart is meant to last forever. That is why it is beautiful." Daiki knelt beside him, staring at the blank sand where the word had been. "I write to remember," Ata said, "not to keep. The desert teaches us this. You can try to write permanence into impermanence, but the wind will come anyway. The wisdom is not in keeping the word, it's in knowing it was there and letting it go." Daiki felt his chest tighten, not with pain, but with a strange relief. All the teachings he had collected, all the thoughts he had clung to, they were not wrong, but they were not the path. The path was letting them pass like ink on sand, without fear. Moral of the story: wisdom is not found in clinging, but in releasing. Like ink drawn gently across sand, truth leaves its mark in the heart, not to be held, but to be honored and let go. Peace comes when we stop trying to make every moment permanent and instead embrace the beauty of its passing. 15. The bridge with no name. In the mountains where clouds kissed the earth and rivers spoke in whispers, there stood a narrow wooden bridge that connected two quiet villages. It had no sign, no carvings, no name. It simply existed, weathered, simple, unnoticed by most. Yet every day people crossed it, farmers with baskets, children chasing wind, elders walking home before dusk. Not far from the bridge lived an aging monk named Daigo. He often sat nearby, watching the river below and the people above it. One morning, a young traveler named Soma approached him. Soma had been searching for purpose, wandering from temple to temple, reading ancient texts, hoping to find the one truth that would bring him peace. "I've been looking everywhere for meaning," Soma said. "But every answer I find only leads to more questions. I don't know what I'm meant to do or who I'm supposed to be." Daigo gestured to the bridge. "Watch," he said. They sat in silence as a woman crossed with a bundle of herbs, then a child with a stick dragging behind him, then a quiet man with tired shoulders. Daigo finally spoke. "This bridge has no name. No one praises it. No one writes poems about it. But it connects people. It helps them cross. That is enough." Soma frowned. "But it's just a bridge." "Exactly," Daigo said, smiling gently. "It does not ask to be more. It simply fulfills its purpose, moment by moment. And because it doesn't need recognition, it never doubts its worth." Soma looked down at the river, watching the water swirl around the rocks. He realized how much of his life had been spent trying to be something important, wise, impressive. But in trying so hard to matter, he had forgotten how to be. As the wind passed over the water, he let out a quiet breath. He didn't find the answer he expected, but somehow, in the stillness, in the simplicity of a bridge that had no name, he began to feel the answer he needed. Moral of the story: you do not need a title or recognition to live a meaningful life. Like a bridge that carries others quietly, your purpose may be simple, unseen, or ordinary, but when you act with sincerity and kindness, you create connection, and in that, you become whole. 16. The last plum blossom. Winter had come late to the temple in the valley. Snow blanketed the stone paths, and the trees stood bare, their branches dark against the pale sky. Only one tree still held a single plum blossom, small, delicate, pale pink against the cold. It clung stubbornly to its twig, even as the wind grew colder. An elderly monk named Ryoma would pass the tree each morning on his way to the meditation hall. He always paused for a moment, quietly bowing his head toward the final blossom. One morning, a younger monk, Jun, noticed this and asked, "Master, why do you honor a single flower that will fall any day now?" Ryoma looked at him with soft eyes and smiled. "Because it is still here." Jun frowned. "But it's dying. Its time is almost over. Doesn't that make it less important?" The old monk turned toward the tree, his voice barely louder than the wind. "No, it makes it more precious. That blossom knows it cannot stay, and still it opens." Jun stood silently beside him, uncertain how to respond. Ryoma continued, "Many of us wait for perfect conditions to bloom. We say, 'I will be kind when things are easier. I will be patient when the world is calm. I will be peaceful when I have no sorrow.' But this blossom teaches us something different. Even in the final moment, even in the cold, there is beauty, there is courage." Later that day, as the sky darkened and snow began to fall, Jun returned alone to the tree. The blossom was still there, trembling gently in the wind. He felt something shift in him, not sadness, not urgency, but presence. He realized that part of his suffering came from trying to hold on to what would always change. He feared endings, so he closed his heart before they could arrive. But this single blossom, facing its final days, had opened anyway. That night, Jun did not grieve the coming fall of the blossom. He was grateful for having seen it, alive, beautiful, fully here. Moral of the story: impermanence does not take beauty away, it gives it meaning. Like the last plum blossom, our moments are brief, but that is why they matter. When we stop waiting for perfect conditions and open ourselves to life as it is, we discover the quiet bravery of simply being present. 17. A bowl of clear water. In a quiet village surrounded by rice fields and winding paths, there was an old Zen master named Eiji who was known for his silence more than his words. He lived simply, with only a mat to sleep on and a small wooden bowl he used for everything: his meals, his tea, and sometimes just water. One summer morning, a young man named Kenta came to visit. His face was full of tension, and his mind even more so. "Master," he said, "I feel lost. My mind is full of anger, regret, and confusion. I can't make clear decisions. I hurt the people I love without meaning to. I don't understand why I feel so heavy." Eiji said nothing. Instead, he poured water into his old wooden bowl. Then he stirred it with a twig, sending ripples across the surface. The reflection of the sky above blurred, twisted, and scattered. "Look," Eiji said. "What do you see?" "Only a mess," Kenta replied. "I can't see anything clearly." Eiji set the bowl down and motioned for silence. Minutes passed. The water slowly settled. The ripples faded. The surface became still, and the sky returned, reflected clearly once more. "Now, what do you see?" Eiji asked. "The sky," Kenta whispered. "It's beautiful." Eiji nodded. "This bowl is your mind. When it is disturbed by anger, worry, or regret, it cannot reflect anything clearly. But if you stop stirring it, stop reacting, stop forcing, it will settle, and only then will you see the truth again." Kenta lowered his gaze. No grand answer. No sharp solution, just stillness. But in that stillness, something shifted. He realized how often he stirred the waters of his own mind, arguing with the past, fearing the future, grasping for control. He had never given himself time to just let things be. That day, he sat quietly beside the master, watching the sky shimmer in the bowl. It was not the absence of thought he had found, but the quiet beyond it, the kind that waits patiently beneath every storm, ready to return. Moral of the story: when the mind is restless, clarity cannot come. But if we learn to sit with stillness, like a bowl of clear water, our confusion begins to settle. In that calm, we begin to see again, not just with our eyes, but with our heart. 18. Whisper of the Bodhi Tree. In the heart of an ancient monastery, there stood a Bodhi tree, its wide branches casting shade over the courtyard. It was said the tree had grown from a cutting of the one beneath which the Buddha awakened. Pilgrims came from far away to sit under it, hoping to feel some trace of that stillness. But over time, most only saw it as a sacred landmark, a place to take photos, leave offerings, and move on. Except for one monk, Tama. Tama was not the wisest nor the eldest, but he came to the Bodhi tree every morning before sunrise. He sat quietly, not to pray or ask for anything, but just to listen. The wind through the leaves, the birds waking slowly, the hush of the world before it became busy again. While others rushed to duties or rituals, Tama stayed, still, breathing. One morning, a visiting scholar noticed him. The scholar had read every sutra, traveled to every holy site, and collected rare teachings. Yet his heart remained unsettled, full of questions he couldn't quiet. Watching Tama sit so peacefully under the tree stirred something in him. Curious, he approached and asked, "What are you doing here each day? You never chant, you never speak, you just sit." Tama looked up with a soft smile. "I listen." "To what?" the scholar asked. "The tree." The scholar frowned. "The tree speaks?" Tama looked back toward the branches, swaying gently in the morning breeze. "Not in words, in presence, in patience. It doesn't force growth. It doesn't demand stillness. It just stands, rooted, receiving the sun and wind, and somehow, in its quiet way, it reminds me how to live." The scholar sat beside Tama, unsure but willing. For the first time in years, he stopped thinking about peace and simply listened. The rustle of leaves sounded like a breath, like the earth exhaling. And in that moment, he felt something he hadn't found in books. Space. Not the kind you measure with time or distance, but the kind that opens inside the soul when everything else gets quiet. Moral of the story: wisdom is not always spoken, it is often felt. Like the whisper of the Bodhi tree, peace comes not through striving, but through stillness. When we stop seeking answers and begin to simply listen, we remember what the mind forgets. Everything we need is already here. 19. The Scroll and the Silence. In a monastery perched at the edge of a misty forest, there was a single room locked to all but the eldest monk, Master Jorin. Within that room, behind a faded wooden door, lay a scroll. No one had ever seen what was written on it. Many believed it held the deepest teachings of Zen, truths so powerful they could awaken the mind with a single glance. For years, young monks whispered stories about it. Some claimed it contained ancient wisdom from the Buddha himself. Others believed it revealed the secret to perfect peace. One day, a curious monk named Saji, full of questions and determination, approached Master Jorin and bowed deeply. "Please, Master," he asked, "I feel ready. May I read the scroll?" Jorin studied Saji's face for a long moment, then simply nodded. With a heart pounding with hope, Saji followed the master to the quiet room. The door creaked open. Inside was nothing but a small table and the scroll tied with a piece of worn cloth. Master Jorin stepped aside, saying nothing. Saji opened the scroll slowly. His eyes scanned it. It was blank. Shocked, he turned to the master. "There's nothing written here," he said, voice trembling. "Is this some kind of test?" Master Jorin smiled, a soft warmth in his tired eyes. "No test. This is the teaching." "But I don't understand," Saji replied. "How can this be wisdom?" Jorin walked to the open window. The wind whispered through the trees. "All your life," he said, "you have searched for meaning in words, in books, in voices louder than your own. But Zen is not always spoken. The deepest truths are not written. They are found in the silence where the self disappears." Saji stood still. The wind moved gently across his face. The scroll in his hands was light, almost as if it held something more in its emptiness than any words ever could. And for the first time, he understood, not with his mind, but with something deeper, quieter. He rolled up the scroll, not disappointed, but humbled. Moral of the story: not all wisdom is found in words. Some truths are written in silence, felt beyond thought. When we stop demanding answers and listen with our whole being, we discover that emptiness is not absence, it is space. And in that space, peace begins to speak. 20. Lanterns over snow. In a mountain village blanketed by winter, the first snowfall came quietly, covering rooftops, trees and paths in soft white stillness. Each year, during the coldest night, the villagers gathered for a quiet tradition. They lit paper lanterns and carried them to the temple, placing them along the snowy path to guide others through the darkness. One year, a young girl named Hannah stood at the edge of her doorway, holding her lantern, but refusing to move. Her grandmother had passed that autumn, and since then, the warmth in her heart had gone cold. She felt numb, unsure what lighting a lantern could possibly do to ease the ache in her chest. As others walked toward the temple, Hannah stayed behind. But one lantern caught her eye. It moved more slowly than the others. It belonged to an old monk named Jiro, who lived alone in a small hut near the forest. His steps were careful, slow, his breath fogging the air. When he reached Hannah's gate, he paused and looked at her gently. "Will you walk with me?" he asked, holding out a hand. She didn't answer right away, but something about his presence, soft, steady, unhurried, pulled her forward. They walked side by side, saying nothing. The snow crunched beneath their feet, and their lanterns flickered with the breeze. The path was silent but glowing, lined with light. And as they walked, the girl felt something stir. "It still hurts," she said quietly. Jiro nodded. "It will, for a while." "Then why do we light the lanterns?" He stopped and turned to her. "Because even when it hurts, we can still offer light. Not because we are healed, but because we remember. Grief is not the opposite of love. It is a part of it. When we carry light through darkness, we are showing the way, not only for others, but for ourselves." A tear rolled down Hannah's cheek, warm against the cold. She looked ahead, dozens of small lanterns glowing along the white path, like stars fallen to earth. She held her own lantern closer and continued walking. She still missed her grandmother, but now her love had somewhere to go. Moral of the story: grief does not silence the light within us. Even in the coldest seasons of life, we can still carry warmth forward. Like lanterns over snow, every small act of love becomes a light, not to erase sorrow, but to walk beside it. And with each step, we help ourselves and others find the path home. 21. Echoes in the bamboo grove. In a valley wrapped in early morning mist, there was a bamboo grove known for its stillness. The stalks rose high like green pillars, their slender forms swaying gently in the wind. Many monks came to this grove for meditation, drawn by its quiet beauty. But there was one monk named Ryu who came not for silence, but to forget. Ryu had once lived as a warrior. Though he had laid down his sword years ago, his heart still carried the echoes of the past, voices of men he could not save, battles that left him broken inside. Even in the peace of the monastery, he heard them, in dreams, in footsteps, in the sound of his own breath. He longed for quiet, but his mind was always loud. One day, overwhelmed by a sudden flood of memories, Ryu wandered deep into the bamboo grove. He walked until he reached its center, where the wind blew freely and the rustling leaves seemed to whisper. He cried out, not with anger, but with exhaustion. "When will it leave me?" he asked. "When will the noise stop?" His voice echoed through the grove, carried by the wind, bouncing off the stalks. He sat down, shoulders heavy, face in his hands. Then something happened. The wind passed through again, and this time the bamboo didn't just echo his voice, it replied in its own way. Not with words, but with rhythm, with presence, with movement that did not resist the wind, but danced with it. It was then Ryu noticed the bamboo did not fight the air that moved through it. It did not stiffen against the sound. It became the sound. It let the wind pass, and in doing so, it became music. Tears welled in his eyes, not from pain, but from recognition. The echoes in his mind were not meant to be silenced. They were meant to be heard, honored, and then let go, just as the wind passes through the bamboo and moves on. He sat there until night fell. He did not try to stop the memories anymore. He simply let them move. And for the first time in many years, they began to lose their weight. Moral of the story: we cannot silence the echoes of our past by force, but when we stop resisting and allow them to move through us, like wind through bamboo, they soften. In acceptance, not avoidance, we find peace. Even old pain becomes music when we let it pass without holding on. 22. The moon's gentle gaze. In a quiet village where the mountains held the sky, a young monk named Kyo struggled with shame. Though kind and sincere, he often judged himself harshly for his flaws, his restless thoughts, his short temper, his quiet fear of never being enlightened enough. Every mistake felt like a stain, every emotion like failure. No matter how much he meditated or recited teachings, he couldn't escape the heaviness he carried within. One evening, after yet another day of inner turmoil, Kyo wandered up the hill behind the temple. The wind was cool, and the sky was beginning to darken. He sat on a flat stone and looked up, his thoughts swirling. "Why can't I be calm like the others?" he whispered. "Why can't I be pure?" The moon was rising slowly over the mountains, full, pale, and glowing. It cast soft silver light across the trees and rooftops, bathing everything in quiet stillness. As he watched, Kyo noticed how the moonlight touched everything: cracked stones, broken fences, even muddy paths, with the same gentle glow. It did not choose what to shine on, it simply shone. Just then, an old monk named Hyson, who had quietly followed Kyo from a distance, sat down beside him without a word. For a long time, they just looked at the moon together. Finally, Hyson spoke softly. "Do you see how the moon gives its light to the broken branches and the fallen leaves just the same as it gives to the highest mountain peaks?" Kyo nodded. "It does not ask what is worthy. It simply shines. That is the nature of compassion, not just for others, but for yourself. Can you love yourself like the moon loves the earth, gently, without condition?" Kyo felt something loosen in his chest, something he hadn't even known was clenched. Tears welled in his eyes, not from sadness, but from the quiet realization that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to be perfect to be loved. Maybe he could be seen just as he was and still be enough. He looked back up at the moon, now higher in the sky, and for the first time in a long time, he felt it. Peace. Moral of the story: true compassion does not judge what is worthy of love. Like the moon that shines on all things without choosing, self-love begins when we let go of perfection and allow ourselves to be seen, just as we are. In that gentle gaze, healing begins. 24. Path of the Quiet Mind. In a forest where the trees stood tall and still, there was a narrow path worn smooth by the quiet steps of monks over many generations. This path led to no shrine, no temple, no great destination, only a clearing with moss-covered stones where the wind moved gently and the silence was alive. One day, a young monk named Nari walked this path with hurried steps. Though he had practiced meditation for years, his thoughts still clung to him like heavy robes, worries about his progress, doubts about his worth, questions that never seemed to end. He was always trying to quiet the mind, yet it remained as loud as ever. Frustrated, he came to the clearing and found Elder Hina seated on a flat stone, eyes half closed, smiling softly. Without looking up, she said, "You walk like someone chasing something." Nari sighed. "I'm chasing peace," he said, "but it keeps running from me." She opened her eyes. "Maybe it's not peace that runs. Maybe it's you who doesn't stop." He frowned. "I try to quiet my thoughts. I try to empty my mind, but the more I try, the louder everything gets." Hina reached into her sleeve and pulled out a small wind chime. She held it in her hand, motionless. "What do you hear now?" she asked. "Nothing," he replied. Then she let go. A breeze moved through the clearing, and the chime rang softly, clear, delicate, beautiful. "This," she said, "is the mind when it is still. Not because you forced it, but because you allowed it. The wind will come and go. Your thoughts will come and go. But peace is not in controlling the wind. It's in sitting still enough to hear it." Nari looked at her, then at the path he had just walked. He realized he had treated the journey as a race, the silence as something to earn, the mind as something to defeat. But in this clearing, with the chime ringing gently in the breeze, he understood the quiet mind is not an achievement. It is a return. That day, he walked back down the path slowly, not to reach anywhere, but to be fully present in each step. Moral of the story: peace is not something you chase or conquer. The quiet mind appears when we stop trying to silence it and begin to listen instead. Like a wind chime waiting for the breeze, stillness comes when we make space, not through force, but through presence. 25. Tears of the Lotus. At the heart of a wide, still pond, far from the paths where people walked, grew a single white lotus. Each morning it opened with the sun, soft petals unfolding like a quiet prayer. Monks from a nearby monastery often came to sit by the water's edge, drawn to its beauty and stillness. One morning, a young nun named Hana sat by the pond with tears in her eyes. She had tried for years to stay strong, through loss, loneliness, and the quiet pressure to always appear calm. But inside, she carried a sorrow that wouldn't leave. The more she tried to silence it, the louder it became. As she wept silently, she noticed a ripple on the surface of the pond. A single drop of water had fallen from the lotus above. It slid gently from a petal and joined the stillness below without a sound. Hana watched, captivated. It looked like the lotus was weeping. An old monk named Tadao had seen her from a distance and approached slowly, sitting beside her in silence. After a while, he said, "Do you see how even the lotus weeps?" Hana looked at him, startled. "It's just water," she said. "Yes," he nodded. "And so are your tears, natural, honest. The lotus does not hold back the drop. It does not harden itself against the sky. It lets go, and still, it blooms." She looked back at the flower, the way it held both softness and strength, the way it didn't close itself to protect from sorrow, the way its beauty didn't require silence, it allowed release. "I'm tired of pretending I'm not hurting," Hana whispered. "Then don't," said Tadao. "Let your tears fall like the lotus lets the morning dew return to the water. There is no shame in feeling, only in forgetting that you are human." Hana closed her eyes, her tears now flowing freely, not as a burden, but as a release. In that moment, she didn't try to be strong. She didn't try to be wise. She simply let herself be. And for the first time, she felt lighter. Not because the pain had gone, but because she had stopped carrying it alone. Moral of the story: tears are not weakness, they are truth. Like the lotus that lets go of the morning dew, we too can release what we carry. In allowing ourselves to feel without judgment, we create space for healing. Strength is not found in holding back, it's found in letting go. 26. The cat on the temple roof. Atop the curved wooden roof of an old Zen temple, a white cat often sat in the sunlight, still as a statue. The monks had come to call her Sora, meaning sky, because she spent more time above the temple than on the ground. She never meowed, never chased mice, never begged for food. She simply was, resting in the wind, stretching in the sun, disappearing into the mist when it rained. One afternoon, a novice monk named Jun sat in the courtyard, watching her. His heart was troubled. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find the calm that others seemed to carry so easily. His meditations were full of distractions. His body ached when he sat. His thoughts never stayed still. Seeing his frustration, the temple's abbot, Master Nyo, approached quietly and sat beside him. Together, they watched the cat. "I wish I could be like her," Jun whispered. "She looks so peaceful, so effortless. Meanwhile, I struggle even to sit for 10 minutes. Master Nyo smiled. "That cat," he said, "does not ask the wind to stop blowing or the sun to rise faster. She doesn't try to be anything but what she is. She just listens and rests where she is." June frowned. "But I'm not a cat. I can't just sit on a roof all day." The abbot nodded. "True. But you can stop climbing in your mind. You spend your days trying to reach somewhere, some perfect version of calm. And in doing so, you miss the calm that's already here. That cat is not peaceful because she tries to be. She is peaceful because she lets go. June looked up again. The cat blinked slowly, stretched her paws, and turned her face toward the wind. Nothing in her posture was forced. Nothing in her presence was trying. She simply trusted the roof beneath her and the sky above her. For the first time, June took a deep breath, not to fix anything, but to feel it, just as it was. Moral of the story: peace is not found through effort alone. Like the cat on the temple roof, we find stillness when we stop chasing it. When we stop trying to control every thought or moment and simply rest in what is, we realize the calm was never far. It was only waiting for us to stop reaching. 27. Reflections of a silent drum. In a temple deep within a forest of pine and cedar, there was an old ceremonial drum. Its skin had faded with time, and its surface was never struck anymore. It stood in the meditation hall, untouched, like a relic from a forgotten rhythm. Most visitors passed by it without notice, but to the monks, it held something sacred. A boy named Koji arrived at the temple one autumn evening. He was not yet a monk, just a seeker. He had known too much noise in his short life: arguments in his home, the rush of the city, the sound of his own angry thoughts that never seemed to stop. He longed for silence, but silence frightened him. It felt empty, unfamiliar, too quiet. After several days of struggling with the silence of the monastery, Koji approached the abbot, Master Yugen. "Why is it so loud inside my head?" he asked. "Even here, in this peaceful place, I hear everything." Yugen did not answer. Instead, he led Koji into the meditation hall and pointed to the old drum. "This drum has not been struck in many years," the master said. "Yet it still teaches." Koji tilted his head. "But it doesn't make any sound." Yugen smiled. "Not all drums teach through sound. Some teach through stillness." He motioned for Koji to sit before the drum. "Close your eyes," he said, "and listen, not for what the world gives, but for what rises from within." Koji sat. At first, there was nothing but the hum of silence. And then, slowly, he began to notice the rhythm of his breath, the rise and fall, the beat of his heart, steady and deep, the pulse of life that had always been there beneath the noise. He stayed there a long time. He began to hear something he hadn't before, not with his ears, but with his presence. A rhythm not made of sound, but of awareness. When he opened his eyes, the drum stood the same, silent, still. But in that silence, he had discovered something that had always been waiting. Moral of the story: not all truth is spoken. Not all rhythm is heard. Sometimes, the most powerful teachings come in stillness. When we stop searching for sound and start listening to silence, we begin to hear the rhythm of our own being, the quiet drum of life, always beating within. 28. The monk's forgotten question. Long ago, in a quiet monastery surrounded by fog and pine trees, there lived a young monk named Kai. He was curious by nature, always asking questions. What is the meaning of life? Where does suffering end? How does one reach enlightenment? His mind was a restless sea, always searching for an answer just beyond the next wave. One day, his teacher, Master Shin, gave him a task. Take this question. he said, handing Kai a small scroll. Go to the top of the eastern mountain. Sit with the question until you understand. Kai opened the scroll. Inside was one line. What is the one truth that ends all confusion? He bowed and left without hesitation. Through forests, across rivers, and up steep trails, he climbed. Each step was filled with thought. He turned the question over again and again, filling pages of a journal with possibilities. Days passed, then weeks. He meditated, he fasted, he searched within and without, but the answer never came. One morning, after many days in silence at the mountaintop, Kai awoke and couldn't find his scroll. He looked everywhere, but it was gone. Taken by the wind, perhaps, or lost in the night. He felt a rising panic. Without the question, how would he find the answer? But then, something strange happened. He sat anyway. Not to solve, not to search, but simply to sit. He watched the clouds drift below. He noticed the warmth of the sun on his face. He heard the cry of a hawk echo across the sky. For the first time since beginning his journey, his mind was quiet, not because it had found an answer, but because it no longer needed one. In the stillness, a soft realization arose. The question had not been something to solve. It had been something to carry, until it carried him to this moment. And in this quiet, peaceful now, where nothing needed to be answered or fixed, he understood what the scroll could never say. He had forgotten the question and remembered himself. Moral of the story: some questions are not meant to be answered. They are meant to lead us deeper into presence. When we stop demanding meaning and allow ourselves to simply be, we discover a peace beyond thought. Sometimes, forgetting the question is how the real truth begins. 29. Rain on the Red Gate. At the edge of an ancient Zen temple stood a red wooden gate, faded from years of wind and sun. It did not lead to anything grand, no palace, no shrine. It simply opened into a small garden with stones, moss, and a single maple tree. Yet the monks cared for it lovingly, repainting it when the seasons allowed, sweeping its steps each morning before dawn. One evening, a monk named Arai stood by the gate, watching the sky darken. Thick clouds gathered, and soon the rain began, slow at first, then steady, then strong. The Red Gate, once bold and dry, became slick with water. Rain dripped down its frame, pooling on the ground below. Arai stayed there, unmoving, letting the rain soak his robe. A young monk, Hero, approached with concern. "Come inside," he said. "You'll catch cold." But Arai only smiled gently. Sometimes it is the rain that teaches. Hero stepped beside him, puzzled. "Teaches what?" Arai gestured to the gate. "Look at it. The rain does not ask the gate to move, nor does the gate push the rain away. One falls, the other stands. There is no struggle, only meeting, only acceptance." Hero looked closer. The water slid across the redwood in shining trails. The gate did not resist. It did not complain. It simply was, present, grounded, open. "I've been holding back my feelings," Hero admitted, "trying to be calm all the time. But inside, I feel so much: sadness, anger, confusion. I thought I had to keep it all out to be at peace." Arai turned to him. Peace is not the absence of feeling. It's the willingness to feel without drowning. You are not the rain. You are the gate. Let it fall. Let it pass. Hero closed his eyes. The sound of the rain was gentle now, like soft drumming on the earth. He let himself feel everything he had pushed away, and yet he remained standing. The sky wept, and so did he. But neither broke. Moral of the story: peace doesn't mean we avoid the storm. It means we learn to let it fall. Like rain on a red gate, emotions will come and go. When we stop resisting what we feel and simply allow it to move through us, we discover strength not in control, but in acceptance. 30. A feather in the wind. In a small village nestled between rice fields and silent hills, there lived an elderly woman named Emmy. Though she was not a monk, many villagers came to her for comfort. She spoke little, moved slowly, and always carried a bundle of old feathers she had collected over the years. No one knew why, but she treated them with great care, as if they held something sacred. One day, a boy named Naoki came to her house, eyes full of worry. His family was struggling, his schoolwork was heavy, and his mind felt like a storm he couldn't escape. "I feel pulled in every direction," he said, voice shaking. "I try to be strong, but I can't keep up. Everything is moving too fast." Emmy smiled gently and handed him a small feather, light, white, and soft as breath. "Come," she said, motioning him outside. They walked together to the edge of a quiet field where the wind moved gently through the grass. Emmy raised her hand and let the feather go. Naoki watched as it danced into the sky, twisting, floating, rising and falling with the wind. "Do you see how it moves?" she asked. Naoki nodded. "Yes, but it's being pushed around. It has no control." Emmy looked at him kindly. "Or maybe it's free. It doesn't fight the wind. It doesn't cling to where it was. It simply trusts the air to carry it, and it lands when it's ready." Naoki was silent. For a moment, the wind moved through them both. He realized how tightly he had been gripping everything: his future, his fears, his image of who he should be. He had tried to control every part of life, and in doing so had lost the ease of simply moving with it. The feather landed softly at his feet. He picked it up, not to keep it, but to feel its lightness. Something in him softened. Not because the problems had gone away, but because he saw a different way to carry them. Moral of the story: life doesn't always move the way we plan, but like a feather in the wind, we find peace not by holding tighter, but by letting go. When we release the need to control everything, we begin to move with life, not against it. And in that surrender, we become light enough to rise. 31. 10,000 petals. In a valley that bloomed only once a year, there grew a vast field of lotus flowers. Each spring, the petals opened all at once, soft whites, gentle pinks, quiet golds, covering the land like a living breath. People from distant villages would travel for days just to see them. It was said that one petal alone could quiet the mind, but to stand among 10,000 was to feel the heart awaken. A quiet monk named Emmy tended the field year-round. She watched over the lotuses when no one else was looking, when they were just seeds buried deep, when the winds threatened them, when they disappeared in winter's sleep. Most pilgrims never saw her. They only saw the bloom. One spring, a young man named Daichi arrived just as the first flowers opened. He was tired, bitter from loss, his heart heavy with disappointment. "I came to find peace," he said to Emmy, "but it feels unfair. Why must these flowers bloom only for a short time? Why can't they stay forever?" Emmy smiled, her eyes soft like dusk. "Because that is what makes them sacred." She invited Daichi to walk through the field. Petals brushed against their robes, the wind carrying a scent too delicate to name. Emmy bent down and picked up a petal that had just fallen to the earth. "This one will never bloom again," she said. But was it any less beautiful? Daichi looked around. Thousands of petals, alive only for a moment, and yet the moment was enough. He closed his eyes and felt something shift. He had been holding so tightly to what he'd lost. People, dreams, days that passed too quickly. He had wanted permanence, but in the presence of the petals, he saw nothing needed to last forever to be worthy of love. Each petal was a reminder that things fall, that things fade, but in their brief existence, they shine. Daichi wept quietly, not from sadness, but from recognition. The beauty he was chasing had always been in the fleeting, in the fragile, in the now. Moral of the story: true peace is found not in holding on, but in fully experiencing what is here, now. Like petals that bloom only for a moment, life is precious because it passes. When we stop fearing the end, we begin to truly see. In each moment, 1,000 gifts are blooming, if we are willing to notice. 32. Stillness beneath the pine. On a hill just above a winding river, an ancient pine tree stood tall, its roots deep in the earth and its branches stretched wide like open arms. Beneath this pine, the monks of a nearby temple often came to sit in meditation. It was said the tree had stood for over 500 years, through storms, droughts, and changing seasons, and had never once bowed to the chaos around it. A young monk named Nari was drawn to the tree, but not for its stillness. She was restless, carrying the weight of guilt from her past. She had come to the temple to find peace, but her thoughts kept spinning. Memories of mistakes, sharp words she couldn't take back, choices she wished she hadn't made. One evening, as a storm approached and winds swept the hillside, Nari ran to the pine. She sat beneath it, trembling, both from the cold and from everything she felt inside. The branches above her swayed gently, but the trunk stood unmoved, steady, calm. The head monk, Master Ryo, came and quietly sat beside her. After a long silence, he spoke. "Why do you sit in the storm?" "Because it matches how I feel," Nari whispered. "Wild, loud, out of control. I don't know how to calm it." Ryo placed his hand on the trunk of the pine. "This tree has seen more storms than you or I will ever know. But it does not fight the wind. It does not fear the rain. It simply stands. Deep roots, soft branches. That is how it survives." Nari looked up. The pine didn't resist the wind. It moved with it. But its core remained firm. There was no fear in it, only presence. She realized that stillness didn't mean silence in the world. It meant not being shaken inside. She closed her eyes. She felt the storm, but also the earth beneath her. She breathed deeper. The chaos was still there, but it no longer owned her. Beneath the wind, beneath the thoughts, there was a stillness she hadn't felt before. It didn't erase her pain, but it held it gently. Moral of the story: stillness is not the absence of storms. It is the calm within them. Like the pine rooted in the hillside, we find peace not by avoiding pain, but by grounding ourselves through it. When we stop resisting and learn to stand with presence, we discover a strength that no storm can move. 33. The scent of old parchment. Deep within the temple's quiet library, where sunlight fell like soft gold through the high wooden beams, there sat rows of scrolls, some centuries old, wrapped in silk and tied with fading string. Few monks entered this place often. It was still, dust-laced and sacred, holding memories in silence rather than sound. One evening, a restless monk named Naoko wandered in. He had been searching for clarity. He felt lost between who he was and who he was supposed to become. The pressure to be wise, composed, enlightened, it clung to him like a weight. He hoped that somewhere in these ancient teachings he would find a sentence, a secret, something to quiet the storm inside. He pulled a scroll from the shelf. The silk unraveled gently, and with it came a scent. Aged parchment, dry ink, time itself. He inhaled deeply. The fragrance stirred something in him. Not understanding, but memory. Not answers, but presence. As he unrolled the scroll, he noticed something strange. Many of the lines were faded, almost invisible. Some were missing entirely. Others had smeared, as though touched by rain or tears long ago. The words were broken, incomplete. Naoko felt a wave of disappointment. "How can something so old carry so little clarity?" he whispered aloud. From the doorway, the old librarian monk, Hisao, entered with a gentle smile. "That scroll," he said, "has survived earthquakes, fire, war, and time. The words may be broken, but their spirit remains. Sometimes wisdom is not in what is perfectly preserved, but in what still breathes, even after being worn." Naoko looked again at the faded text. He could not read every line, but he could feel it. The effort of the hand that wrote it, the pauses in the brushstrokes, the silent devotion behind each curve of ink, and he realized he didn't need every word to understand. The message wasn't only in the script, it was in the space between the lines, the silence, the imperfection, the endurance. He placed the scroll back with care, tears in his eyes, not from grief, but from grace. Moral of the story: wisdom does not always speak in full sentences. Sometimes it whispers through what remains. Like the scent of old parchment, truth can rise from things worn, faded, and incomplete. You do not need to be perfect to carry meaning. Even in your cracks, something sacred still breathes. 34. Tea with the Ancients. In a remote monastery where the clouds kissed the roofs and time seemed to move more slowly, there was a room known as the Tea Hall of Echoes. The walls were lined with faded scrolls and wooden shelves filled with ancient teacups, each said to have been used by a monk long gone. No one used them now. They were too delicate, too old, but they were never forgotten. A young monk named Haruki was given the task of cleaning the hall once a week. He did so carefully, but without much thought, dusting, sweeping, and leaving before the quiet made him uncomfortable. He was devoted, but impatient. Meditation frustrated him. The silence felt too heavy. He wanted enlightenment to come like thunder, not like mist. One morning, Master Ray entered as Haruki swept the floor. "Today," the master said, "you will not clean, you will serve tea to the ancients." Haruki looked up, confused. "But they're gone." Ray smiled. "They are only gone if you forget to sit with them." Unsure, Haruki chose an old teacup, cracked slightly at the rim, but still whole. He boiled water, prepared the tea as he had been taught, and poured it slowly into the fragile cup. Then he placed it before an empty cushion and sat across from it. At first he felt foolish. The silence was thick. But then something shifted. The warmth of the cup, the scent of the tea, the stillness of the room. They began to speak, not in words, but in presence. Haruki imagined the hands that once held that cup, the breaths taken before a sip, the quiet thoughts that had passed through this room centuries before. He poured another cup, and another, for the ancients, yes, but also for himself. He sat there for over an hour, no longer waiting for enlightenment, but simply being. The tea grew cold, the silence grew kind, and in that stillness, Haruki began to understand. Wisdom doesn't always arrive with sound. Sometimes it sits quietly in old teacups, waiting for someone to notice. Moral of the story: peace often lives in the quiet rituals we overlook. When we slow down and become fully present, even in something as simple as tea, we connect with something timeless. Stillness is not empty. It is full of memory, meaning, and quiet grace. All it asks is that we sit and listen. 35. The Mirror of Stillness. In a secluded temple built beside a calm, untouched lake, there hung a single mirror on a wall of polished stone. Unlike ordinary mirrors, this one was said to reflect not just faces, but the true state of one's mind. Many who came to see it believed it held mystical power, though the monks who lived there spoke of it simply as a mirror that did not lie. One day, a woman named Ray arrived. She had traveled for many days, carrying heavy sorrow in her heart. Her life in the city had been filled with noise, expectations, failures, masks she had worn for so long she no longer remembered her own face. She had heard of the mirror and came hoping it might show her who she truly was. A gentle monk named Toma led her to the quiet chamber where the mirror hung. The room was silent, lit only by the soft morning light. Ray stood before the mirror and gasped. Her reflection wavered, not physically, but emotionally. Her eyes looked tired, her face tense, but it was not the outside she noticed most. It was the feeling. Her unrest stared back at her, raw and unfiltered. She turned away, ashamed. "I don't like what I see," she whispered. Toma, standing beside her, replied, "The mirror shows nothing more than what is already there. It judges nothing. It simply reflects." Ray sat on the floor, her hands trembling. "How do I change what's inside?" The monk walked to the edge of the lake outside and pointed to the water. "When the surface is disturbed, it cannot reflect the sky. But when it is still, even the stars can be seen in it. Your heart is the same. Don't fight the reflection. Don't rush to fix it. Sit with it. Breathe with it. Let the storm pass. Ray returned to the mirror, this time in silence. She stood there, breathing slowly, watching. Her reflection did not change, but her relationship to it did. It no longer frightened her. It no longer shamed her. It simply was. And in that stillness, she felt something soften. A beginning. Moral of the story: the truth of who we are is not found in perfection, but in honest reflection. Like a mirror or still water, peace arises when we stop resisting what we see and begin to sit with it. Stillness is not empty. It is the place where clarity begins. 36. Dandelions in the prayer garden. In the center of a monastery known for its careful beauty, there was a prayer garden, meticulously kept with smooth stones, trimmed hedges, and raked lines in the sand that formed patterns of quiet symmetry. Monks would walk its paths slowly, reciting mantras and tending to each corner with love and precision. One morning, a young monk named Soothe noticed something unusual. Bright yellow dandelions had begun to grow in the edges of the garden, small, wild, uninvited. He rushed to pluck them out, seeing them as intruders, imperfections in a place meant for peace. Before he could finish, the head gardener, Master Aya, gently stopped him. "Why are you pulling them?" she asked. "They don't belong here," Soothe replied. "The garden is meant to be pure and quiet. These are weeds." Aya knelt beside one of the dandelions, her eyes soft. "And yet, it grows in silence, just like the pine. It reaches for the sun, just like the lotus. It did not ask to be here. It simply arrived." Soothe looked closer. The yellow petals shone with morning light. The stem stood tall, resilient. He realized he hadn't really seen it before. He had only seen what he thought it wasn't. "The garden doesn't need to be perfect," Aya continued. "It needs to be alive. And sometimes what we call weeds are just flowers we haven't learned how to welcome." Soothe felt something stir inside him, a memory of how often he judged himself the same way. Every flaw, every feeling, every uninvited thought, he treated them like weeds. Something to remove, something to fix. He sat in the garden for a long time that day, not pulling, just noticing. And slowly, the dandelions stopped looking like mistakes. They looked like honesty, like life, blooming where it could, even in the cracks. He left one growing near the entrance where all could see it. Moral of the story: not all that is wild is wrong. Sometimes peace means letting go of control and allowing life to bloom, even where we didn't expect it. When we stop trying to make ourselves or the world perfect, we begin to see the quiet beauty in what simply is. Even a dandelion can be a prayer. 37. Calligraphy of the Soul. In a quiet hall warmed by candlelight and the scent of cedar ink, a Zen master named Ayumu practiced calligraphy each morning at sunrise. His brush moved slowly, gracefully, each stroke born of breath and stillness. He did not try to impress. His scrolls were not for display. They were a meditation, each mark an offering, each space between the lines just as important as the lines themselves. One day, a young woman named Nari arrived at the temple. She had studied calligraphy for years, perfecting the curves and angles of each character. Her technique was flawless, her writing beautiful, but her spirit was restless. "I write with discipline," she told Master Ayumu, "but it feels hollow. I want it to mean something again." Without a word, Ayumu placed a blank scroll before her and handed her a brush. "Write," he said, "but do not try to be perfect. Do not try to be anything." Confused but willing, Nari dipped the brush in ink and began to write. Her strokes were uncertain, her hand hesitating where it would usually flow. The lines were uneven, and by the end, the character was not elegant, but it was honest. Master Ayumu looked at the paper, then at her. "This," he said softly, "is the first time I've seen you on the page." Nari blinked, unsure. "But it's flawed." "Yes," he said, "and full of soul." He walked to a shelf and pulled down one of his own scrolls. It showed a single character, simple, imperfect, with visible hesitation in the brushwork. "The soul," he said, "is not written with perfect lines. It appears in the space between control and surrender, between breath and brush. You don't write truth with your hand, you write it with your being." Nari looked at her scroll again. She saw more than ink. She saw emotion. She saw herself. That night, she returned to her writing, but not to perform. She wrote to listen. Each stroke was no longer about the character, but about presence. And her soul, once hidden behind precision, began to speak. Moral of the story: true expression is not flawless, it is honest. Like calligraphy born from breath and being, your soul writes itself not through perfection, but through presence. When you release control and let your heart guide the brush, you don't just create beauty, you reveal truth. 38. The Sleeping Bell. In a quiet village tucked between two hills, there was an old bell that hung in the center of a temple courtyard. Forged long ago by monks who no longer walked the earth, it had once rung at sunrise and sunset, calling people to stillness, prayer, and presence. But over time, the rope frayed, and the bell fell silent. It had not rung in many years. Still, the villagers called it the heart of the temple. A young monk named Rin had grown up hearing stories of the bell's sound, deep, steady, and calming. But he had never heard it himself. It stood above him each day, heavy and silent, as he swept the courtyard below. One day, feeling lost in his practice, Rin sat beneath the bell in quiet frustration. "Why do I feel nothing?" he whispered. "I meditate, I follow the path, but inside, everything still feels empty." The temple's abbot, Master Seiji, had been watching from afar. He approached slowly, then sat beside Rin without a word. They both stared up at the silent bell. Seiji finally spoke. "This bell has not made a sound in 20 years. Yet every morning you bow in its presence. Why?" Rin looked down. "Because it still matters. Because it could ring again." The old master smiled. "Yes, and so it is with you." Rin looked up, eyes wide. "Just because something is silent," Seiji said, "does not mean it is dead. The bell sleeps, but it still holds its voice. And so does your heart. Peace does not come because you feel it every day. Peace lives within you, waiting. Even in silence it listens. Even in stillness, It prepares. A breeze moved through the courtyard, and for just a moment, the bells swayed. It didn't ring, but Rin heard something deeper than sound. The quiet promise that not everything needs to make noise to be alive. That evening, he returned to his cushion, not trying to feel peace, but to trust that it was already there. Like the sleeping bell, it waited patiently within him. Moral of the story: not all silence is emptiness. Like a bell that sleeps in stillness, peace may live quietly within you, unheard but never gone. Trust that even when you cannot feel it, your heart holds its sound. Some truths don't shout. They wait and whisper until you're ready to hear. 39. A crane's footprint in snow. In the northern hills, where winter blanketed the land in white silence, a small Zen temple stood, its rooftops heavy with snow. Life there was slow, each breath visible in the cold air, each footstep carefully placed. It was said that in winter the world whispered instead of speaking, and only those who truly listened could hear it. One morning, just before dawn, a young monk named Haruki was sent out to gather firewood. As he walked beyond the temple walls, he was lost in thought, worrying about his future, about his failures, about not being enlightened enough. The path ahead blurred under the weight of his wandering mind. Then, in the stillness, he saw it. A single footprint, delicate, almost unreal, pressed lightly into the fresh snow. It was the print of a crane. No other tracks, no trail, just one perfect mark. As if the bird had touched the earth for a moment and then vanished into the sky. Haruki knelt beside it, breath held, afraid to disturb the silence. The shape was so soft, so precise, it felt more like a poem than a mark. He waited there, unmoving. His teacher, Master Shun, arrived moments later, sensing the boy's stillness. Without asking, he stood beside him and looked down. "It was only here for a moment," Haruki whispered. "And yet it left something," Master Shun said. "Not by force, not by staying, just by being." They remained in silence, watching the delicate print melt slowly under the morning sun. The moment was passing, like all moments do, but the stillness it left behind settled deep into Haruki's chest. He realized then the crane had done nothing to leave its mark. It didn't try. It simply stepped, light and true, and the snow remembered. Tears touched his eyes, not from sadness, but from the gentle ache of understanding. He had been trying so hard to become something, to prove his worth. But peace wasn't in doing more, it was in doing less, with more presence. Moral of the story: you don't need to move loudly to leave meaning behind. Like a crane's footprint in snow, even the lightest step, taken with presence, can touch the world. When you stop trying to impress and start simply being, your quiet truth leaves the deepest mark. 40. The path that vanished. There was once a well-worn path that led from a small Zen monastery into the forest. Each morning, the monks would walk this trail in silence, using it to gather water, herbs, or simply to listen to the wind pass through the trees. The path was familiar, steady, comforting. It was marked by footprints and years of habit. One spring, after a long and heavy rain, the path disappeared. Washed away by water and covered in fallen branches, it was no longer clear where it began or where it ended. The younger monks grew uneasy. "How will we find our way now?" they asked. "Without the path, we are lost." An old monk named Kenji smiled quietly and said, "Perhaps now we are finally found." Confused, the monks watched as Kenji stepped off the stones and into the unknown. No map, no instructions, only his breath, his senses, and the sky above him. The forest was thick, the ground soft with new growth. But he walked slowly, gently, as if the earth itself were guiding him. One of the monks called out, "What if we go the wrong way?" Kenji paused and turned back, his eyes kind. "There is no wrong way when you are truly present. It is not the path that gives us direction. It is our awareness as we walk." As they followed, the monks began to notice things they had never seen before when walking the old path. New buds on trees, a fox slipping quietly through the undergrowth, the deep scent of moss after rain. What had once been routine now felt alive. Later, when they returned to the monastery, their robes damp and their hearts strangely full, a young monk whispered, "I think I understand. We do not follow the path. The path follows us." Kenji nodded. Sometimes the path must vanish so we can begin to see again, not with our eyes, but with our presence. Moral of the story: when the familiar disappears, do not fear. The path is never truly lost. It lives in your awareness. Sometimes life erases what we cling to so that we can awaken to the moment in front of us. The true way forward is not marked by footprints, but by presence. 41. The ocean in one drop. Along the edge of a cliff where the sea met sky, there stood a small hut belonging to an old Zen monk named Toma. He lived alone, watching the waves come and go with the tides, listening to the wind as though it carried the voice of the universe. Each morning, he walked barefoot to the shore and sat in silence as the ocean breathed before him. One day, a young woman named Aya climbed the long path to visit him. Her eyes were full of urgency. She had studied many teachings, read countless books, and meditated faithfully. But still, something felt missing. "I want to understand the truth," she said, "not ideas or metaphors. I want to see it clearly, fully, completely." Toma nodded and handed her a small clay bowl. He led her down to the beach, knelt beside a tide pool, and dipped the bowl into the water. He held it out to her, clear and still. "This is the ocean," he said. Aya looked down, confused. "It's just a drop." The monk smiled. "Yes, but it holds the taste, the salt, the depth. The ocean is not gone. It is right here, reflected in this one small bowl. Can you see it?" She stared at the water. It was so ordinary, so quiet. But as she looked longer, she began to feel it. The coolness, the shimmer, the way the sky mirrored inside it. The same water that surged against rocks, that stretched beyond the horizon, now rested gently in her hands. Toma said, "You search for truth like it is something large and far away, but truth is like this drop. It contains everything, if you are still enough to see." Aya sat beside him, the bowl in her lap. A wave crashed in the distance, but her focus did not leave the quiet ripple in the bowl. She had always believed she needed something bigger, more dramatic, more profound. But now she felt the depth of the ocean resting in her palms. And for the first time, she stopped searching. Moral of the story: you don't have to cross oceans to find truth. The vastness you seek lives in the smallest moment. One breath, one thought, one drop of awareness. When you stop rushing and begin to truly see, you realize the whole ocean lives inside a single drop. 42. Zen and the Lost Lantern. Long ago, in a village nestled between misty hills and flowing streams, there was a temple that glowed each evening with the light of a single lantern. The lantern was nothing ornate. Its frame was simple wood, its paper thin, but it was lit with care every night by a monk named Akio. He believed the light helped guide travelers through darkness, not just on the path outside the temple, but within themselves. One winter night, as snow began to fall and the wind howled through the trees, the lantern went missing. The monks searched everywhere, through the corridors, around the gates, even into the edge of the forest. But it was gone. Some whispered that it had been stolen, others worried it was a sign of something bad to come. But Akio remained calm. He sat outside in the cold where the lantern once hung, breathing softly, his hands folded in his lap. A younger monk approached, shivering with worry. "Why aren't you upset?" he asked. "That lantern guided so many. Without it, we are in the dark." Akio smiled gently. "No one walks in darkness unless they close their eyes." The younger monk frowned. "But there is no light now." Akio pointed upward. "There is. The snow reflects the moon. The cold awakens the skin. The silence shows us the sound of our own breath. When we lose the light we depend on, we begin to see the light we always carried." The monk stood still, letting the snow settle on his shoulders. The world was dim, but not empty. There was a soft glow in the sky, a quiet pulse in the night, and inside him, a strange peace he hadn't felt before. Without the lantern to lead him, he began to feel something deeper: trust. That night, they lit no fire, and yet the monks still found their way to their cushions, still found their breath, still found each other. Because sometimes the path is clearest when what we relied on disappears. Moral of the story: when the light you depend on goes out, do not panic. In losing what guides you, you may discover the guidance within. Zen is not about always seeing clearly. It is about trusting that even in darkness, the next step is already inside you. 43. The Smile of the Sleeping Buddha. High atop a moss-covered hill, hidden from the main paths of the temple grounds, there lay a stone statue of the Buddha reclining in deep rest. His eyes were gently closed, and a soft smile curved across his face, not wide or showy, but subtle, like the last glow of sunlight before evening. The villagers called it the Sleeping Buddha. No one knew who carved it or when, but it was said that those who sat with him long enough would feel their hearts soften. One day, a man named Kuro came up the hill. He was known for his sharp mind and restless energy. A businessman, once wealthy and admired, Kuro had recently lost everything: his money, his reputation, and the future he had built in his mind. Now, all that remained was a constant ache in his chest and a voice that would not stop asking, what went wrong? He stood before the statue, arms crossed, skeptical. Why does he smile? He muttered. What could he possibly know of failure, of loss? The wind moved gently through the trees, as if listening. Kuro sat, not out of belief, but out of exhaustion. He stared at the Buddha's face, looking for a reason behind the smile. It wasn't joy, not exactly, nor was it mockery. It was something quieter, peaceful, forgiving, unbothered by the passing of time. As hours passed, Kuro's thoughts slowly loosened. The stories of his past, the regret, the shame, they began to drift like clouds. And then something strange happened. He laughed, softly, but truly. He didn't know why. Perhaps it was because the Buddha had been smiling at him the whole time, not because Kuro was special or broken or enlightened, but simply because he was. The Buddha smiled not at success, not at failure, but at being itself. And in that still moment, Kuro felt something open, not grand, not loud, just a little more space inside his chest, like a knot slowly loosening. Moral of the story: the Buddha smiles not because life is perfect, but because he sees through its illusions. True peace comes when we stop measuring our worth by what we gain or lose. In stillness, beyond success or failure, there is simply being, and in being, there is peace. 44. Waking the Wind. On a quiet hill where tall grasses swayed and the horizon stretched like a deep breath, there lived an old monk named Senzu. He was known for his silence, his stillness, and the way he seemed to move with the wind, never ahead of it, never behind. People said the wind itself paused to listen when he spoke, though he rarely did. One restless afternoon, a young man named Kael came to him. Kael was full of energy, ambition, and questions. "Master," he said, "I have studied every teaching, read every scroll. I meditate, I work, I try to control my thoughts, and still I feel nothing, no peace, no awakening. What am I doing wrong?" Senzu said nothing. Instead, he gestured toward the field and began walking, his steps light on the earth. Kael followed, confused and a little frustrated. They reached the top of the hill where the grasses danced gently in the breeze. The old monk sat down and looked out over the land. Kael sat beside him, waiting for wisdom. After a long silence, Senzu asked, "Can you make the wind blow?" Kael blinked. "No, of course not." "Can you stop it from blowing?" "No," he said again, slower this time. Senzu nodded. "So, why do you try to force your mind, your peace, your awakening? Some things cannot be commanded. They arrive when the air is right, when the space is open. The wind does not need to be told to move. It wakes when it's time." Kael looked around. The wind was rising, brushing through the grass, whispering against his skin. Not loud, but present, always present. "I've been chasing peace," he said quietly, like it was something I could catch. Senzu smiled. "Peace is not caught. It is allowed. Like the wind, it comes when you are still enough to feel it." Kael closed his eyes. The grass rustled. The sky breathed. He didn't need to force anything. He didn't need to reach. He just needed to be and let the wind come to him. Moral of the story: Peace is not something you chase or control. Like the wind, it comes when you are still, open and ready. The more you force, the more it slips away. But when you rest, soften and let go, you'll find it was always there, waiting to be felt. 45. Meditations in shadow. At the base of a mountain where the light rarely reached, there was a small, quiet cave where a monk named Soothe chose to meditate each day. Unlike the others who sat in the sunlight or beneath cherry blossoms, Soothe sought the shadows. Not because he feared the light, but because he wished to understand the parts of himself that didn't want to be seen. Many found this strange. "Why choose the dark?" a younger monk once asked. "Doesn't light bring clarity?" Soothe replied only, "Some truths reveal themselves only in darkness." Years passed, and one spring, a new monk named Taro arrived at the temple. He had tried everything to escape the weight he carried: guilt from past mistakes, anger he didn't understand, and a sadness that visited him like an old, unwelcome friend. He longed to feel free, to feel clean inside. But the more he chased light, the more his shadow followed. One evening, Taro found Soothe at the cave's entrance. "I've tried to let go of my pain," he said, "but it keeps finding me." Soothe nodded and motioned for him to sit. Inside the cave, there was no flame, no lantern, only the cool, deep dark. At first, Taro felt uncomfortable. His thoughts grew loud. Regrets echoed louder than before. But Soothe remained still, breathing slowly, gently. "You cannot heal what you refuse to face," he whispered. Taro let the words settle. He realized he had spent his life trying to outrun the darkness inside him, numbing it, distracting it, pretending it wasn't there. But now, in this shadowed space, with no distractions, he simply sat and listened. He began to see that the pain wasn't a punishment, it was a part of him, asking to be held. The shadows did not threaten him, they revealed him. In that quiet, he didn't suddenly become healed. But for the first time, he didn't turn away, and in not turning, he found stillness. Moral of the story: peace isn't found by avoiding the darkness, but by sitting with it. Your shadow is not your enemy. It's a part of you waiting to be seen. When we stop running and start listening, even our pain becomes a teacher, and in the heart of that darkness, light quietly begins to rise. 46. The monk who sat for the moon. In a remote mountain temple, surrounded by silver pines and silent snow, there lived an old monk named Hoshin. He was known not for his teachings, but for a quiet ritual he performed every full moon. No matter the weather, cold, wind or cloud, he would walk to a stone platform in the garden and sit facing the sky, eyes turned upward, hands resting gently in his lap. Many monks wondered why. He never explained. He never missed a moon. One evening, a young novice named Kenji, filled with questions and restlessness, finally approached him. "Master," he said gently, "why do you sit for the moon? It shines the same whether you're here or not. You say nothing. You ask nothing. You just sit." Hoshin smiled softly, his eyes reflecting the pale glow of the rising moon. "And yet," he whispered, "it comes." Kenji tilted his head. "You mean the moon?" "No," the master replied. "Stillness, clarity, presence. They come, not because I ask, but because I wait without demand." Kenji sat beside him, unsure at first. The air was cold, the silence thick. But after a while, something inside him began to settle. The usual noise in his mind softened. Thoughts still rose, but they didn't cling. He noticed how the moonlight painted the snow, how the trees cast long, soft shadows, how even his breath moved gently, like smoke in the night. "I always thought awakening was something dramatic," Kenji said, "like lightning." "Sometimes," said Hoshin, "it is. But more often, it is like this, a quiet light, always there, waiting for you to stop looking everywhere else." Kenji said nothing more. He simply breathed and watched. The moon hung in the sky, unchanged, but something inside him had shifted. Not suddenly, not loudly, but deeply. And for the first time in his life, he understood the gift of simply sitting, not to achieve, not to become, but to be. Moral of the story: awakening does not always arrive with sound or fire. Sometimes it comes like the moon, quiet, constant and full. When we stop chasing and start sitting with the moment as it is, we open the space for peace to rise, soft as light on still water. 47. Garden of Forgotten Footsteps. Behind the monastery walls, beyond the meditation hall and the rows of prayer flags, there was a garden few remembered. The monks called it the Garden of Forgotten Footsteps. It had no flowers, no carved stone paths, only soft moss, fallen leaves, and the quiet imprint of footsteps slowly fading into the earth. No one tended the garden. No one raked its ground or swept its corners. It simply was, changing with the wind and time, holding the quiet trace of those who had passed through without needing to be remembered. One day, a monk named Yuna wandered there after evening chants. She had been feeling invisible, unseen in the silence, unnoticed among the senior monks, unimportant in her own heart. "I don't know if I matter," she had whispered to herself days before. "I try so hard to do things right, but it feels like I leave no mark." In the garden, she walked slowly. Her sandals pressed into the soft earth, leaving light footprints behind. But as she turned to look, the moss began to rise again, erasing her steps as if she had never been there. Tears welled in her eyes. "Even the earth forgets me," she thought. But then, the temple's oldest monk, Master Ray, appeared beside her. He too had come quietly, barefoot, his own footsteps disappearing behind him. He saw her pain and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "The garden does not forget," he said. "It forgives. It lets go. Every step is felt, even if not seen. The moss rises, not to erase you, but to teach you. Presence matters more than permanence." Yuna looked around. She saw no grand monuments, no names carved in stone, only the softness of time gently covering what was no longer needed. And yet, it was peaceful, sacred even. She closed her eyes, and for the first time felt comfort in being part of something, not separate. A breath in the wind, a step in the moss, a moment in the endless rhythm of life. Moral of the story: not all marks are meant to last. Like footsteps in soft earth, your presence may fade from sight, but it still matters. Life remembers not in monuments, but in moments. In choosing presence over permanence, we touch the world in the quietest, most lasting way. 48. Leaves that never fell. At the edge of a forgotten forest stood an old cherry tree, twisted and wise, older than the temple nearby. The monks believed it was sacred, not because of its blossoms in spring, but because, in the heart of winter, a few of its golden leaves clung stubbornly to its branches. Year after year, long after the wind had stripped the other trees bare, these few leaves remained. One winter morning, a young monk named Ray sat beneath the tree, shivering from more than just the cold. He had recently lost someone dear, a friend, a teacher, a guiding light. The grief lived inside him like a shadow that refused to leave. Meditation brought no relief. Ritual brought no peace, only the dull ache of remembering. He looked up at the leaves above him, fragile, dry, faded, but still holding on. He whispered to himself, "Why don't they fall? Why can't they let go?" Behind him, the abbot, Master Ishin, approached quietly and sat down beside him. "You ask about the leaves," he said gently, "but you're really asking about yourself." Ray lowered his eyes. "I'm tired of carrying this, but I'm also afraid to let it go. It feels like, if I stop grieving, I'll lose them all over again." The old monk nodded, then looked up at the stubborn golden leaves. Some trees let go early, some late, and some not at all. Not because they are wrong, but because they are still holding the sun of that memory. That warmth is not pain. It's love remembering itself. Ray listened as the wind passed softly through the branches. The leaves trembled but did not fall. "You don't need to force release," said Master Ishin. "Let grief be with you, like these leaves. When the time comes, the wind will carry it for you. But until then, it's okay to feel it, to love, even through sorrow." Ray looked up again. This time, he saw the leaves differently, not as burdens, but as offerings, not as what remained, but as what mattered. And for the first time, his grief didn't feel like a weight. It felt like a presence, gentle, sacred, and deeply human. Moral of the story: letting go does not always happen all at once. Some feelings, like the last leaves of winter, stay a while longer, not to hurt us, but to honor what was loved. When we stop rushing our healing, we begin to see that holding on is not weakness. It's part of the way the heart remembers. 49. The Well That Sings. At the edge of a forgotten village, where weeds crept through stone paths and time moved slowly, there stood an old well made of cracked rock and worn rope. No one used it anymore. Modern pumps had replaced its water, and most had stopped visiting. But those who listened closely said the well still sang when the wind passed through it. They called it the Well That Sings. One autumn morning, a young monk named Kenji arrived in the village on a personal retreat. His heart was tired. He had been practicing for years, learning, reciting, sitting, but felt distant from everything, even himself. He longed for some spark, some sign that his path had meaning. An elder pointed him toward the old well. "It doesn't give water anymore," the man said, "but sometimes it gives something deeper." Curious, Kenji visited the well. At first, he heard nothing, just silence. He dropped a pebble and waited, but no sound came. He sighed, disappointed, and sat beside it. He closed his eyes and simply breathed. Then, as the wind moved across the fields, it slipped gently down the narrow stone opening. The well responded, not loudly, not clearly, but softly. A hum, a tone, a quiet song that rose from the deep. It wasn't music in the usual sense. It was vibration, like the earth remembering something it once knew. Kenji placed his ear closer. The well's song was subtle but beautiful, ancient. He listened for a long time, and slowly he began to cry. He didn't know why. There was no clear reason, only a feeling, rising gently from within, like something buried was being called back to life. A forgotten truth. He realized then, even though the well was no longer used, it still sang. It still responded to the world. It was not forgotten. It was simply quiet, waiting for someone to listen, not with ears, but with stillness. Kenji smiled through his tears. The well had not given him words or answers. It had given him something deeper, a return to his own silent center. Moral of the story: some things speak only when we become quiet enough to hear. Like an old well that sings with the wind, your soul may seem silent, but it is waiting to be heard. You don't need noise to find meaning. You need stillness, presence, and the courage to listen to what lives deep within. 50. Silence woven in silk. In a village where the mountains met the clouds, there lived an old woman named Kiko, who was known as the Silk Weaver. Her hands were slow but sure, her threads fine as breath, and her cloth softer than anything words could describe. People came from far away to buy her silks, not for their beauty alone, but for the peace they seemed to carry. She worked in silence. No radio, no conversation, only the hush of thread through loom, the rhythm of breath, and the stillness that wrapped itself into every strand. One day, a young girl named Emmy came to learn from her. Emmy was quick, clever, and full of energy, but her hands were restless, her mind wandered. "Why do you never speak while you work?" she asked. "Doesn't it get lonely?" Kiko smiled gently and handed Emmy a spool of thread. "Try weaving with noise in your heart," she said, "and see what happens." Emmy tried. She spoke, she hummed, she rushed. Her fingers fumbled, the pattern tangled, the silk caught and broke. Frustrated, she looked at Kiko, who was still weaving, slow, deliberate, silent. "Why doesn't yours ever tear?" Emmy asked. Kiko stopped, held up her cloth, and whispered, "Because I weave with silence." She pointed to the fabric. Not just the thread carries meaning, the space between carries it too, like breath in music, like pause in poetry. Without silence, nothing flows. Emmy sat quietly. For the first time, she simply listened to the hush of silk, to the beat of her own heart, to the world not asking anything of her. She began to weave again, slower this time, breathing with each movement, letting the silence join her, not as emptiness, but as a companion. And as the cloth grew beneath her hands, so did something inside her. A calm she had never known, a stillness she didn't have to earn. Moral of the story: true peace is not just found in quiet places, it is woven into the quiet moments we carry within. Like silk, Life flows best when we honor the space between, when we move gently and listen deeply. Silence becomes not emptiness, but presence. And in that presence, we find peace. 51. When the rock learned to float. In a remote village nestled between cliffs and clouds, there was a Zen garden, known not for its beauty, but for one strange story passed down for generations, the story of the rock that learned to float. Children spoke of it in whispers, and elders only smiled when asked, never confirming, never denying. But at the center of the garden, there it lay, a smooth, round stone resting beside a koi pond, unmoving and ordinary. One summer, a monk named Haru came to the temple in search of peace. He had lived through grief and loss, and though he meditated daily, his heart still felt heavy, like something too solid to lift. His past clung to him like wet clothes after rain. One evening, as he sat alone by the pond, the head monk, Master Kisho, joined him. Haru spoke quietly. "My mind is full of stories I can't let go of. What I should have done, what I lost. They weigh me down. I try to find stillness, but I sink." Kisho picked up the smooth stone from the edge of the pond and held it out. "This is you," he said, "heavy with memory, shaped by time, strong, but sinking." Then he placed the rock into the water. It dropped quickly and disappeared into the depths. "Exactly," Haru whispered. "That's what I feel." Master Kisho smiled, then reached into his robe and pulled out a folded lotus leaf. He gently placed it on the surface of the pond and said, "Now, be this." "But that's just a leaf," Haru said. "It floats because it's hollow." "Exactly," the master replied, "because it doesn't try to carry what no longer belongs to it." Haru stared at the leaf as it drifted softly, held up by nothing but surrender. He realized the truth wasn't about changing who he was, but about releasing what he was holding. The pain, the regret, the belief that he had to carry it forever. That night, Haru returned to his cushion. He didn't try to empty his mind. He simply sat and breathed, and allowed some of the heaviness to begin melting away. Moral of the story: you don't have to stop being strong, but sometimes strength means letting go. Like the rock that sinks and the leaf that floats, peace comes not from force, but from release. When we stop gripping the weight of our past, we discover that even heavy hearts can rise. 52. A cloud learns stillness. In a valley where the sky stretched wide and open, clouds drifted endlessly above the hills, sometimes light and wispy, sometimes dark and heavy with rain. The villagers often watched them pass, reading their moods like pages in the sky, but none watched them more closely than an old monk named Ryoma, who spent each morning seated on the temple's stone steps, gazing upward. One day, a boy named Soothe, full of questions and worry, came to sit beside him. Sota's thoughts were always racing, about school, about what others thought of him, about what he might become one day. He could not sit still, and even when his body did, his mind never stopped. "Master Ryoma," he asked, "how do you stop your thoughts from moving all the time? I try to meditate, but it feels like my head is a sky full of clouds that won't stop shifting." The old monk smiled, still watching the sky. Then you're already seeing clearly. Sota blinked. I am. Ryoma nodded. The mind is like the sky. Thoughts, like clouds, will come and go. But here is the truth most forget. The sky never chases the clouds. It never clings to them. It lets them pass. It holds them all, without losing itself. Sota frowned. But I want my mind to be clear, empty, like a blue sky. Ryoma turned to him, his voice soft. Even the clearest sky has clouds sometimes, and even the busiest sky still holds space. Stillness is not the absence of clouds. It's the knowing that you are the sky, not the storm. Just then, a single cloud slowed above them. It drifted gently, as if listening. Sota watched it move, not rushing, not fighting, just floating with grace. He let out a long breath, and for the first time didn't try to push his thoughts away. He simply watched them, like clouds, letting them come, letting them go. And in doing so, he felt stillness, not because his mind was empty, but because he was no longer lost in the clouds. Moral of the story: stillness does not mean an empty mind. It means a spacious heart. Like the sky holding every cloud, you can hold every thought without being swept away. Peace comes not from control, but from gentle awareness. When you stop chasing stillness, you begin to live it. 53. Breath of the Bamboo Flute. In a village surrounded by quiet mountains, there lived a blind flute maker named Riku. Each day he carved bamboo from the nearby forest, shaping it into flutes with delicate hands and deep attention. His blindness, some said, made him hear more than others could see. He never played loudly. His music was soft, like wind through tall grass, like breath. Many came to him to buy flutes, hoping to learn how to play. But Riku would only give them one condition. You must sit in silence with the flute before you try to make a sound. One impatient traveler, Akira, arrived one spring morning. He was known for his ambition, always moving, always searching for something greater. "I've played music all my life," he said. "I want your finest flute." Riku nodded and handed him a freshly carved one, simple, smooth, unfinished in appearance. Akira raised it to his lips, ready to play, but Riku gently stopped him. "Wait," he said. "Sit. Breathe." Frustrated but respectful, Akira sat cross-legged. Riku said nothing. The forest was quiet. Only the sound of wind brushing the leaves filled the air. Minutes passed, then longer. Akira began to notice his breath, how shallow it was, how fast. He tried to slow it. Then something shifted. He didn't just hear the wind anymore, he felt it. The same wind that moved through the trees was the same breath inside him. The flute in his lap, once a silent object, now felt alive, like it was waiting. Finally, Riku spoke. "A flute does not play music. It carries breath, and your breath carries your spirit. If your breath is hurried, the song is broken. But if your breath is steady, even silence becomes music." Akira lifted the flute again, not to perform, but to offer something. His breath moved slowly, gently. The sound that emerged was soft, imperfect, honest. The forest seemed to listen. He smiled. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was real. Moral of the story: true expression begins with your breath. Like a bamboo flute, you carry the music of your soul, not in volume, but in presence. When you slow down and breathe with intention, even the simplest sound can hold the deepest truth. 54. The Bell That Cried Once. At the edge of a cliffside monastery stood an old bronze bell, tall, silent, and darkened with age. Once, it had been rung every morning to welcome the dawn and every evening to quiet the world. But many years ago, during a fierce storm, lightning struck the bell. It cracked down the center and made a single sound, deep, aching, and beautiful. After that, it was never rung again. The monks never repaired it. They called it the bell that cried once. Most walked past it in silence. But one young monk named Asay felt strangely drawn to it. Each evening after meditation, he would sit near the bell and gaze at its silent form. He felt a kinship with it. He, too, carried a quiet crack inside. Asay had endured a loss he didn't speak of. He wore peace on the outside, but grief lived in his chest like a shadow that never left. "Why do I still ache?" he once whispered to the bell. "Why does one moment break everything I've built?" One night, Master Goro joined him beneath the moonlight. The old monk placed a hand on the bell's cold surface and said, "This bell rang only once since the day it was made. But in that single sound, every monk on this mountain stopped what they were doing. Some cried, some prayed, all listened." Asay looked up. "But it's broken." "Is it?" Master Goro smiled gently. "It only rang once, yes, but once was enough. And the crack? That is where the sound came from." Asay felt something stir in his chest. All this time, he had tried to silence his grief, to hide the break inside him. But now he wondered, what if the ache wasn't a flaw? What if it was where his heart had spoken most honestly? The bell had cried once, not in weakness, but in truth, and its sound still echoed, soft, remembered, sacred. That night, Asay sat in silence, no longer needing to be whole, just willing to feel, and in the quiet, something rang, deep within him. Moral of the story: your deepest sound may come from your greatest break. Like the bell that cried once, the moments that crack us open can also reveal our most honest truth. Wholeness isn't about being unbroken. It's about honoring the beauty that lives inside every scar. 55. Watching the flame disappear. In a quiet Zen hall where twilight met the earth like a breath, monks gathered each evening to light a single candle. They placed it at the center of the room and sat in a circle around it, their backs straight, eyes soft, breaths slow. The flame, small but steady, glowed against the shadows, becoming their only light. They did not speak. They simply watched. Among them was a monk named Daiki, young in years but heavy in heart. He carried with him the grief of losing his mother, the shame of past anger, and the quiet ache of never feeling enough. Each evening, he sat before the candle and tried to force his thoughts into silence, but they kept returning. Memories, guilt, longing. One night, after the others had gone, Daiki stayed behind. He stared at the candle, watching its flame dance in the still air. Something inside him stirred. The flame did not resist the wind. It moved with it. It flickered, bent, but did not die. Then, slowly, the candle began to shrink. Its wax softened. Its light lowered. Daiki's breath slowed with it, as if they were linked. He felt sadness rise. He whispered, "Why must it fade?" The temple's old master, who had remained hidden in the shadows, stepped forward quietly and said, "Because everything that burns with truth must one day let go." Daiki's eyes remained on the flame. "But it was beautiful." "It still is," the master replied, "even now as it disappears." The flame grew smaller, a fragile glow. Then, in silence, it vanished, leaving behind no sound, no smoke, only darkness and warmth that lingered in the air. And in that darkness, Daiki felt something unexpected: peace. He realized he didn't need to hold on to the flame to carry its light, just like love, just like memory, just like all the things we fear losing. What is true never truly leaves. It becomes part of us. Moral of the story: not all endings are losses. Like a flame that disappears, some things leave quietly, but leave warmth behind. When we stop clinging and simply witness the fading with presence, we learn that even in letting go there is light, and even in silence something remains. 56. The Candle and the Tide. In a quiet temple by the sea, where the wind carried salt and stories, there was a small meditation room lit by only one candle. The monks called it the room between worlds, because from it one could see both the rising tide and the flickering flame, one in constant motion, the other holding stillness. A monk named Ray often sat in this room. He was known for his kindness, but inside he struggled with doubt. He feared that the peace he showed was only a mask, that the calm he offered others was something he could not keep for himself. The ocean's vastness overwhelmed him. The flame's fragility frightened him. One evening, as a storm gathered at sea and the waves began to swell, Ray lit the candle as usual. The wind pressed against the walls, and outside, the water climbed the shore with a steady, rising breath. He watched the flame dance, sometimes tall, sometimes low, never quite still. The candle, though sheltered, seemed so vulnerable, and yet it did not go out. Master Ren, the temple's abbot, entered quietly and sat beside him. Ray turned to him. "How can this small flame survive while the tide rises outside? It feels like the world is always too much, too loud, too strong. I feel like I'm just a little light about to be swallowed." Master Ren smiled and looked at the candle. "The tide has its place," he said. "It moves, crashes, recedes, but it cannot reach this flame, not because the candle is powerful, but because it is steady. It does not fight the ocean. It simply shines, here, now." Ray looked back at the flame. It wasn't resisting the wind, it moved with it. It was small, yes, but still alive. He realized his peace didn't have to be grand. It didn't have to silence the storm. It only needed to remain gentle, quiet, true, even when everything else rose and fell. And so he breathed, with the wind, with the tide, with the flame. Moral of the story: you don't need to outshine the storm to have peace. Like a candle beside the tide, your light can exist quietly within the chaos. You don't need to control the world, just stay with your breath, your truth, your flame. That is enough. 57. Threads of the morning fog. At the edge of a mountain lake, where the trees leaned over still water and the sky whispered through the pines, a fine morning mist would rise each day before the sun appeared. It was thin, delicate, and drifting, like silk threads being pulled gently across the air. The villagers called it the breath of the earth. A young monk named Nari had just begun her training at a nearby monastery. She was diligent, devoted, but burdened by her need to understand everything. Her thoughts were like tangled rope, always twisting, always pulling her away from peace. She asked questions constantly. What is enlightenment? When will I find it? Why can't I feel calm like the others? One morning, the head monk, Master Hero, invited her on a silent walk around the lake. The fog had just begun to rise, wrapping around the trees and skimming over the surface of the water. It moved slowly, gently, without effort or sound. They walked for some time before Nari finally broke the silence. "Master," she whispered, "what is the purpose of all this silence, this stillness? I feel like I'm missing something." Hero stopped and pointed to the fog. "Are you missing the sky?" Nari looked up. "No, it's still there, but the fog covers it." "Exactly," Hero said. "Your thoughts are like this fog, thin, passing, and easily mistaken for something solid. But they are not barriers. They are invitations to look deeper. You can't grasp fog, Nari, and you don't need to push it away. You only need to wait and see what lies beneath." She stood still, breathing slowly. The fog began to lift, not because of effort, but because the sun rose, and as it did, the lake reappeared in full, clear, quiet, and wide. Her heart softened. She had been trying to force answers out of questions. But maybe, like fog, they didn't need to be solved, just observed, allowed to drift, allowed to part. That morning, she didn't find an answer, but she found space. Moral of the story: not all confusion needs to be cleared right away. Like morning fog, thoughts and emotions drift through us. When we stop fighting to understand and simply observe, clarity rises on its own. Peace isn't in grasping, it's in allowing. Let the fog pass. The lake is always there. 58. The way the sparrow waited. In the corner of a quiet temple courtyard, where old stones held stories and moss grew soft underfoot, there was a single cherry tree that bloomed later than all the rest. Each spring, the monks waited for its blossoms, never rushing, never questioning the delay. They called it the patient tree. One year, a young monk named Sho was assigned to tend the courtyard. He was diligent and thoughtful, but his heart carried impatience like a burden. He wanted to improve quickly, his meditation, his posture, his understanding. He measured his worth by how fast he progressed, and when things came slowly, he doubted himself. One chilly morning, Sho sat beneath the cherry tree, frustrated that its branches were still bare, while others had already turned pink and soft with bloom. As he stared up, a single sparrow landed on one of the bare branches. It did nothing, just sat there, still and calm, as though it knew something he didn't. Sho sighed. "Why wait here? he muttered. "There are better trees, brighter ones. This one hasn't bloomed yet." The voice of Master Jun came gently behind him. "And yet the sparrow waits, not for beauty, not for fruit, but because it trusts the tree will bloom when it's ready." Shou looked at the small bird again. It tilted its head, but didn't move. It wasn't in a hurry. It had chosen this tree not for what it already was, but for what it would become. "You are like this tree," the master said, "and like the sparrow, your spirit must learn to wait. Growth doesn't rush. Truth doesn't bloom on demand." Shou felt something shift inside. He realized that all his pushing, all his effort to be better, had made him miss the gentle unfolding of his own path. Like the tree, his time would come, not when forced, but when trusted. The sparrow stayed a while longer, and Shou this time waited with it, not for the blossom, but for the moment itself. Moral of the story: growth takes time, and rushing it only clouds the beauty of becoming. Like the sparrow that waits on a bare branch, peace lives in trusting the process. Your blooming may come late, but it will come, and when it does, it will be just right. 59. A smile beneath the cypress. In the center of an old Zen monastery stood a great cypress tree, tall, ancient, and still. Its roots stretched deep beneath the mossy earth, and its branches reached toward the sky like quiet arms in prayer. The monks often sat beneath it to meditate, drawn by the peace that seemed to hum in the air around it. It was said the tree had watched over generations of seekers and had never once hurried to grow, nor resisted a single storm. One evening, just before dusk, a monk named Sora sat beneath the cypress, heavy with sorrow. He had failed in his duties that week, burning the rice, forgetting the chant, losing his temper during morning chores. The silence of the monastery only seemed to magnify his shame. He sat with a bowed head, afraid to face the day's fading light. As he sat there, lost in regret, a leaf drifted from above and landed gently on his shoulder. He looked up and noticed the shape of the cypress against the soft sky. Still, rooted, peaceful. The tree did not judge. It had shed many leaves. It had withstood countless winters. It had grown slowly, imperfectly, patiently, and yet it remained, strong in its silence. Just then, the head monk, Master Oji, passed by. Seeing Sora's face, he stopped and sat beside him. For a while, neither spoke. Then Master Oji said softly, "Do you know why this tree is revered?" Sora shook his head. "Because it does not rush to be tall. It does not complain when it loses leaves. It offers shade even when it is tired, and it never tries to be anything other than what it is." Sora's eyes filled with tears. Master Oji smiled gently and touched his shoulder. "You are not here to be perfect. You are here to grow, like this cypress, slowly, quietly, truthfully. Even now, in your sorrow, you are becoming something beautiful." A breeze passed through the branches, and for the first time that day, Sora smiled, small, quiet, honest. The cypress stood above him, unmoved, but in its stillness, it offered more comfort than words ever could. Moral of the story: growth is not loud or perfect. Like the cypress, you are allowed to bend, to shed, to falter. You are allowed to be slow. Peace comes not when you have no flaws, but when you accept yourself, rooted, real, and becoming. Even your quietest smile is a part of that journey. 60. Whispers on the paper fan. In the summer heat of a quiet temple village, the air grew thick and still. Even the wind seemed to sleep. The monks moved slowly, their sandals soft against the earth, their robes clinging to their backs. It was in this stillness that an old monk named Ema could always be found on the veranda, gently waving a handmade paper fan. The fan was delicate, painted with cranes and clouds. Faded with age, it had a small tear near the edge. Yet Ema never parted with it. She used it not just for breeze, but for something quieter, something less seen. One afternoon, a young girl named May, whose family often brought offerings to the temple, sat beside Ema and asked, "Why do you always carry that broken fan? There are many newer ones in the hall." Ema smiled and passed the fan to her. "Feel it," she said, "not just the wind it makes, but the space it holds." May fanned herself. The breeze was soft, barely there. But as she moved it, she noticed something. The silence around her seemed to shift. Each motion of the fan carried not just air, but presence. Like a whisper, too quiet to hear with ears, but loud enough to feel with the heart. "This fan," Ema said, "was given to me by my teacher, not for cooling, but for remembering." "Remembering what?" May asked. "To be gentle," Ema replied. "To move slowly. To notice the space between things. Each time I wave it, I remember her voice, not in words, but in silence. In the way she moved, the way she waited before speaking, the way she smiled before answering." May looked down at the fan, its thin frame bending slightly with her breath. It felt alive, fragile, quiet, wise. That afternoon, she didn't ask more questions. She sat beside Ema and fanned the summer air, not to stay cool, but to stay present. Moral of the story: some things speak not in sound, but in silence. Like the motion of a paper fan, true wisdom lives in gentleness, in rhythm, in attention. When we move with care, we don't just cool the body, we calm the soul. Sometimes, the quietest gestures carry the deepest teachings. 61. Where the river bows. There was a river that curved gently around the foot of a small mountain village, where old stone bridges arched above its calm surface and reeds whispered like monks in prayer. The villagers often said the river was bowing, not turning, not avoiding, but showing respect to the earth it passed through. Children would laugh at the idea, but the elders nodded as if they knew something deeper. A monk named Eta lived near that bend in the river. He was quiet, thoughtful, and known for bowing deeply to everyone, old or young, stranger or friend, even to trees and animals. When asked why, he would smile and simply say, "Because all things deserve to be met with reverence." One day, a young man named Ren came to the temple, restless and full of resistance. He had been hurt by betrayal, by failure, by life not unfolding the way he thought it would. "Why should I bow to a world that hasn't bowed to me?" he asked, bitterness wrapped in every word. Eta did not argue. Instead, he took Ren for a walk along the river. As they reached the curve in the water, the monk stopped and pointed to the place where the river bent around the land. "Do you see that?" he asked. Ren nodded. "It bends," No, Eta said softly. It bows, not out of weakness, but wisdom. It does not fight the mountain. It does not demand a straight path. It honors what is there, and so it flows with grace. They stood in silence as the water moved gently around the bend, calm, steady, unresisting. Eta turned to Ren. You are not weak because you've been hurt. You are not broken because you need to bend. Bowing does not mean surrender to pain. It means meeting life as it is, with softness instead of struggle. Ren lowered his gaze. He had spent so much time standing stiff against the world, bracing himself. But in that moment, he felt the weight of his resistance begin to loosen. He bowed, not out of defeat, but out of peace, and the river kept flowing. Moral of the story: there is strength in yielding. Like a river that bows to the land, you can move forward not by force, but by grace. When you meet life with reverence, especially its hardships, you stop fighting and start flowing. And in that flow, you find your way home. 62. The Parable of the Empty Bench. In the middle of a Zen garden filled with stones, raked sand and weathered pine trees, there was a simple wooden bench. It faced no particular view, neither the koi pond nor the rising sun. It sat off to the side, half in shadow, often unnoticed by visitors who came searching for beauty or wisdom. But the monks called it the listening bench. One day, a traveler named Soothe came to the temple, worn by grief. He had lost his job, his marriage, and the rhythm of his life. I don't know who I am anymore, he told the abbot. I came here for answers, but all I've found is silence. The abbot, Master Rio, smiled gently and led him to the bench. Sit here, he said, until you hear what you came to hear. Soothe frowned. There's no one here. How will I hear anything? The master only bowed and walked away. Reluctantly, Soothe sat. At first, he fidgeted. His thoughts shouted, memories, regrets, fears, judgments. He looked at the trees, the gravel, the cracks in the bench. Minutes passed, then hours, and slowly something shifted. He began to notice the quiet. Not silence as emptiness, but silence as presence. The breeze brushed the pine branches. The sand shimmered slightly in the light. His own breath grew deeper, slower. He had never truly listened to his own stillness, and the bench, though empty, felt full. It did not give him advice. It did not fix his pain. But it did not turn away either. It simply held space. He realized all his life he had filled every moment with sound, with tasks, with proving himself. But peace had always been waiting, on a quiet bench, in the pause between questions, in the still space where nothing needed to happen. He smiled, tears soft in his eyes. Moral of the story: you don't always need answers. Sometimes you need space. Like an empty bench that holds you without judgment, peace is found in simply being, with no effort, no fixing, no noise. In stillness, what truly matters begins to speak. And all you must do is listen. 63. The cup that overflowed with light. In a temple perched on the mountainside, where morning light spilled through tall wooden windows like soft gold, there was an old tradition. Each monk was given a small cup when they began their training. It was plain, made of clay, and meant to remind them of humility. It was to be used for water, for tea, and, when needed, for silence. One young monk named Saku received his cup on the first day. Eager and sincere, he practiced hard, meditated daily, and studied with dedication. But inside, he still struggled with doubt. He often felt empty, like something essential was missing. "I'm doing everything right," he thought, "but why do I still feel unworthy of peace?" One afternoon, while cleaning the meditation hall, Saku dropped his cup. It cracked down the side, a fine line that seemed harmless, but it leaked when filled. Embarrassed, he hid it away and began using another, hoping no one would notice. But Master Rio, the head monk, noticed everything. He asked Saku to join him for tea the next morning. When Saku arrived, Rio brought out a tray and, to his surprise, placed the cracked cup in front of him. "Why this one?" Saku asked softly. Rio smiled and filled it anyway. As expected, water slowly began to leak through the crack, a slow stream falling into the sunlight, pooling on the table. "Master, it's broken," Saku whispered. Rio nodded. "And yet, do you see how the light finds its way through?" Saku looked closer. The morning sun caught the dripping water, and for a moment the crack glowed, like it was shining from within. The floor that once felt shameful now looked beautiful, even holy. "This cup," Rio said, "holds enough. It gives more. Sometimes what leaks out is not a weakness, but a blessing. Peace doesn't come from being whole. It comes from allowing your light to escape through the cracks." Saku sat in silence, tears rising not from sadness, but relief. His emptiness had not been emptiness at all. It had been space for light. Moral of the story: you do not need to be unbroken to shine. Like a cracked cup that overflows with light, your wounds are not failures. They are the places where grace escapes. Stop hiding your cracks. Through them, the world sees your truth. 64. Stillness in the Garden of Crows. Behind a crumbling temple wall, hidden by tall grasses and forgotten statues, was a garden most monks avoided. It was not a place of blossoms or koi ponds. It was wild, tangled, and filled with crows. They nested in the crooked trees, cawed sharply from the rooftops, and filled the air with dark wings and restless noise. But one monk, an elder named Jun, visited the garden each day. While others sought the cherry blossoms and soft wind chimes of the main courtyard, Jun sat among the crows. He brought no broom, no incense, only himself and his breath. Many wondered why. Crows were not symbols of peace or beauty. They were loud, chaotic, unwanted. One afternoon, a young novice named Mio, weighed down by anxious thoughts, followed June in secret. Her mind was noisy, like the crows, always flapping, never still. She hoped to find out what peace the old monk saw in such a place. She watched from a distance as Jun sat cross-legged on a flat stone, the crows swirling above him, their cries echoing through the air. Yet he did not move. He did not flinch. He simply breathed. After a while, the birds quieted. Not entirely, but enough. Mio stepped forward and asked, "Why come here, of all places? Why not the quiet gardens?" Jun opened his eyes and smiled. "Because peace is not proven in silence. It is found in the middle of noise." He looked to the trees, where the crows now perched, watching. "The crows do not disturb me," he said. "They remind me of my own mind, sometimes loud, sometimes restless, always moving. But I do not need the world to be still, for me to be still." Mio sat beside him. At first, the cawing pulled at her attention, but she closed her eyes. She focused on her breath. She let the sound move around her, not through her. And slowly, something inside began to settle. The crows never left, but her mind stopped chasing them. Moral of the story: peace is not the absence of noise, it's the stillness we find within it. Like a monk in the Garden of Crows, you do not need the world to be quiet for your heart to rest. When you stop fighting the chaos and begin to breathe beneath it, calm rises like dawn behind the wings. 65. A gate that opens inward. At the entrance of a quiet mountain monastery, there stood a wooden gate unlike any other. It was tall and old, with hinges that creaked softly in the wind. But what made it strange was this: it did not open outward to welcome visitors. It opened inward, back into the temple itself. Travelers often paused before it, confused. Some tried to push it open the wrong way. Others knocked loudly, waiting for it to yield. But only those who paused, breathed, and gently pulled it toward themselves could pass through. One day, a weary man named Hero arrived. He had spent years searching for peace, through books, long travels, and teachers in distant lands. He had built a life full of effort, discipline, and knowledge, but still his heart felt locked. Tired and uncertain, he came to the monastery in hopes of one final answer. Standing before the gate, he pushed. It didn't move. He knocked. No one came. Frustrated, he stepped back, wondering if this, too, was a dead end. Just then, an old monk appeared on the other side, smiling kindly. He said nothing. He simply walked to the gate and pulled it inward. It opened with ease. Hero blinked. "It opens inward?" he asked. The monk nodded. "Yes, as do you." They walked in silence through the temple grounds, the wind stirring the prayer flags. Hero felt a quiet shift inside him, not from anything spoken, but from that simple gesture. He had been pushing for answers his whole life, believing peace was something to be found out there. But the gate had shown him something else. The way in was always within. That evening, Hero sat in meditation. For the first time, he did not try to achieve silence or force calm. He simply opened inward, gently, like the gate, and something inside him began to soften. It was not dramatic. It was not sudden. But it was real. Moral of the story: true peace does not come from chasing outward. It begins when we turn inward. Like a gate that opens not to the world, but back to the heart, your path becomes clear when you stop pushing and start listening. The entrance to freedom has always been inside you. 66. Zen in a broken mirror. In the dusty corner of a quiet Zen temple, there hung a mirror long forgotten. Its surface was cracked, the silver backing faded, its reflection broken into jagged pieces like a puzzle that could never be whole again. The younger monks never used it. They preferred the polished glass in the main hall, smooth, clean, undisturbed. But one monk, gentle and quiet, returned to the broken mirror each morning. Her name was Aimi. She had come to the temple after surviving many storms: loss, illness, the unraveling of a life once carefully built. Though her body healed, her heart still ached, carrying wounds she couldn't name. She looked into the broken mirror, not to admire herself, but to sit with her reflection, fragmented, distorted, painfully honest. One morning, a visiting monk named Tatsu noticed her there. Curious, he approached and asked, "Why use a mirror that cannot show you clearly?" Aimee turned to him and smiled. "It shows me more clearly than any other." Tatsu furrowed his brow. "But your face, it's in pieces." She nodded gently. "Yes, just like my past, just like my heart. And still, I am here." She ran her fingers along the cracks in the glass, careful, tender. "This mirror does not lie. It reminds me that I do not need to be flawless to be whole, that even in brokenness there is reflection, there is truth, there is beauty." Tatsu stared into the glass. His own face stared back in pieces, his doubt, his pride, his questions. And suddenly, he understood. The mirror didn't offer illusion. It offered presence. It didn't hide the damage. It honored it. For the first time, he didn't turn away from what he saw. Aimee lit a candle and placed it near the mirror. The flame danced across the cracks, catching light in every shard. The broken pieces didn't block the glow. They scattered it, multiplied it. The mirror didn't just reflect, it shimmered. Moral of the story, you don't need to be unbroken to reflect light. Like a cracked mirror, your scars do not hide your truth, they reveal it. In your most shattered places, you carry not weakness, but wisdom. Peace is not perfection. It is the quiet acceptance of all your pieces shining together. 67. The Master's Last Tea. In a remote mountain temple blanketed by soft pine and wind, there lived an old Zen master named Akio. For decades, he had taught students not through loud sermons or complex scriptures, but through small moments, a lifted eyebrow, a shared silence, the pouring of tea. His presence was his lesson, simple, present, still. As the seasons turned and Master Akio grew frail, the monks knew his time was nearing. Yet he showed no fear. Each morning he swept the steps, each evening he boiled water, and one day he called his students to the garden for tea one last time. They gathered beneath the flowering plum tree, its petals falling gently onto the table like quiet blessings. The master's hands trembled slightly as he lifted the pot, but his eyes remained calm, amused almost, as if he knew something beautiful that no one else yet saw. He poured the tea slowly, one cup at a time, the steam rising between them like breath. One monk, unable to hold back emotion, asked, "Master, do you fear the end?" Akio paused, set the pot down, and lifted his own cup. "Do you fear the last sip of tea?" he asked, smiling gently. The monks were silent. Some lowered their eyes, others wept. Akio continued, "Tea is only bitter when you resist its end. But if you drink it fully, with awareness, the last drop is the sweetest." He sipped. The breeze moved through the branches. Plum petals landed in his cup. The sun filtered through the leaves, golden and kind. "This body will pass," he said softly. "But the tea is always being poured. Each of you carries the pot now. Pour carefully. Sip slowly." They sat in stillness, each holding their cup like something sacred. Master Akio looked up at the sky with the eyes of someone who had already let go. Then he closed them, his breath deep and even. No final words, no grand gesture, just presence, just tea, and the sound of the wind. Moral of the story: life is a cup of tea, simple, sacred, and fleeting. When we stop clinging to its end and begin to taste each moment fully, we find that the last sip holds no fear. Peace is not in holding on, but in letting go with grace, one breath, one sip, one moment at a time. As the final breath of these Zen stories settles into silence, remember, peace is not a place you must find. It is something already living inside you, waiting to be seen, heard, and honored. From the stillness of the bamboo grove to the soft echo of the sleeping bell, from the gentle fall of a single leaf to the fleeting beauty of 10,000 petals, these teachings are reminders that healing does not arrive in a thunderclap, but in a whisper, a pause, a single mindful step. You've walked through shadows and silence, learned to listen with your whole being, and discovered that your cracks can shine just as brightly as your strength. Let these stories stay with you, not as lessons to memorize, but as seeds to carry, letting them root gently in your heart. Now, we invite you to reflect. Which story spoke to you the most? Which moment felt like it was written just for you? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice, like a single breath, has the power to inspire someone else on their journey. And if these teachings brought you even a moment of stillness, consider subscribing to the channel. There is more peace to share, more stories to unfold, and more light to come. Until then, breathe deeply, walk gently, and return to yourself.